Long ago, there was a village that the maps forgot. The road that reached it did not brag. It arrived like a quiet guest and left the same way. People there knew the moods of every season and the pattern of every neighbor's footsteps. They could tell the difference between a door pushed by wind and a door opened by worry. In such a place, the days were simple and the nights were honest. And in that place, a boy was born who would one day become a man, one whose life would teach him what fear is and what it is not. From the beginning, he was blessed and burdened with a certain attention. He heard what others missed, the soft counsel of reeds when the river was low, the small complaint of timber on cold nights, the way silence thickens just before rain. Attention like that is a knife with two edges. One edge carves truth, the other carves shadows. The boy did not yet know which hand held the handle. In the evenings, a clay lamp burned in his house. Its light was modest, the sort of flame that does not seek applause. He would sit on the floor and watch how the light made a trembling outline of everything it touched. He learned, without anyone explaining it, that shadow is not an enemy of light. Shadow is light's proof. He did not know it as a sentence, only as a feeling in the bones. Where there is light, there will be outline. Where there is outline, there will be mystery. He was young enough to find mystery a kind of friend, and old enough to feel mystery sometimes lean too close. On certain nights, the sky argued with itself, and storms came without ceremony. Thunder would roll a heavy barrel across the hills, and the wind would test every latch. The boy lay awake and measured the world by counting the distance between a flash and a sound, the distance between a sound and a heartbeat, the distance between a heartbeat and sleep that would not come. He gave his attention to a visitor that never crossed the threshold. He gave it freely, fully, and at dawn he would walk outside and find the world as it had been, wet but unbroken, bent but not ruined. He would feel a small shame then, not because anything terrible had happened, but because he had lived through a night that existed only in his imagination. This is the first lesson that fear delivers in a whisper. It feeds on attention. It does not need to knock. It only needs you to listen with the kind of listening that invents teeth for shadows. The village had a well of stone. By day it was a square of laughter. Buckets talked, ropes answered, and the plank that covered its mouth in winter was a stage for small feet. At dusk, the same stones became a different country. The boy's steps slowed there. He did not look down. He looked away, the way one looks away from eyes that watch from bushes but are only the moon. A question took up residence inside him. What lives where light does not? He could not kill the question with reason, and he could not stop carrying it. Some questions are not asked, they are inherited. The boy's days were sown with work. He learned to sweep a floor so thoroughly that even the corners felt attended. He learned to carry water without wasting it on the path. He learned the grain of wood and how a knife prefers to move with it rather than against it. There was pride in this, the honest kind, the pride that lives in usefulness. When his hands were busy, his thoughts moved like a steady river, yes, still thinking, but without eddies that pull a person under. When his hands were idle, fear discovered its favorite room. He learned the landscape of seasons. Spring smelled like promises and mud. Summer was loud with insects and decisions. Autumn had the flavor of enough. Winter asked direct questions. Each season taught him a different way fear speaks. In spring, fear sounded like the quiet doubt that follows planting. Will what I hid in the ground ever return? In summer, fear sounded like a storm rehearsing its lines beyond the ridge. In autumn, fear sounded like the arithmetic of barns. In winter, fear sounded like the hinge that creaks when everything else is still. He watched the adults who carried a history he did not yet own. Their faces wore lines that were not unhappy lines. He noticed how certain men moved as if their bodies trusted the ground, and certain women had laughter that did not apologize for its volume. They did not appear free of fear, but they did not appear ruled by it either. The boy observed this and did not know how to ask his question out loud. How does a person keep their balance while carrying so much weight? Sometimes the answer appeared by the river. He would stand where the water widened and slowed to reconsider itself. Reeds stood like a congregation that had already forgiven the wind. Fish wrote sentences just below the surface without demanding to be read. In those moments, his inner weather changed. There was no great victory there, no trumpets, no revelation. There was only a quiet that did not need to be explained. And in that quiet, fear misplaced his address book. But evenings return, as they are designed to do. The lamp was lit, the village thinned into dot and hum. The well became an unasked question again. The boy practiced small courage. No heroics, nothing that would be told back to him by others as a story. He walked a little slower past the well. He let his eyes rest on the circle of stones for one long breath before they moved away. He stood 2 seconds longer in the doorway when the latch rattled on windy nights and discovered that a second can be a long country to cross. He watched himself the way people watch the sky for signs. He noticed that fear was loudest when meaning was faint. When he knew exactly what to do, he did it. When he did not know, fear offered to be the captain. Fear does not always shout. It often offers help with a tone that sounds like responsibility. He learned that if he did not choose his tasks, fear would choose his tasks for him. The world around him provided its own curriculum. Once, a calf was born breeched, and the courtyard became a classroom. He saw urgency that did not look like panic. He saw a problem that could kill resolved by hands that did not waste time asking whose fault it was. That night, fear tried to retell the event with larger teeth. The boy answered by remembering the steadiness he had witnessed. Memory, he discovered, can be used in 2 directions: to rehearse disasters that did not happen, or to rehearse the calm that carried people through the ones that did. Not all lessons came in daylight. On a winter evening so clear the stars felt close enough to touch, a neighbor died. The village does not forget its own. The boy stood at the edge of the gathering, feeling the cold tap truth into his skin. Fear tried to build a city there, brick by brick, the city of endings. He stood long enough to notice another city being built at the same time, the city of continuance. Hands on shoulders, bread shared because grief forgets to eat. A song that did not cheer but steadied. He learned that fear prefers the empty middle of waiting. It loses appetite where real things must be done. He grew. The work changed weight. The questions did not shrink. On market days, he saw strangers and learned that fear wears a traveler's cloak very well. Fear says, be suspicious, not because danger has announced itself, but because the unfamiliar asks for a kind of humility the mind resents. He practiced distinguishing between the caution that respects risk and the suspicion that only feeds itself. He learned that truth has a temperature. There's a kind of truth that warms and a kind that burns. He discovered that the things he did not say could hurt him more than the things he said badly. Fear lived in the silence between his intention and his voice. He would carry a sentence like a bowl of water across a crowded room and spill it only at the door. Later, lying awake, he found that the unsaid grows teeth in the dark. He began to experiment with small honesty, a sentence spoken simply, a correction offered gently. Each time, the world did not end. Each time, fear had less to edit at midnight. At the edge of the village, the path met the river's slow bend. He began to take that path more often, as if it carried some medicine in its dust. The path taught him gradients. Courage does not come in a single shining piece. It arrives as small degrees of willingness. Willingness to look, to endure a feeling for 3 breaths instead of 1, to say a word that shakes in the mouth but is clean in the heart. He found himself returning to the well at twilight, not to perform a ritual of bravery, but to test a hypothesis. Perhaps it is not the well that frightens me. Perhaps it is the way I agree to think in the presence of the well. He would stand there, hands on the stones that had learned the shape of generations, and he would watch how his mind tried to tell him a story. He learned to watch the story without climbing inside it. He learned to call a story even when it was persuasive. Fear does not like being observed. It works best when it is mistaken for weather, something that happens to you. The boy began to see fear as something that happens in him, and that small preposition changes the map. In you, not to you. What happens in you can be worked with. He noticed how often fear borrowed the future to make the present taste like ash. Fear arrived with a scroll of possibilities that all wore the same face. He started to respond by asking the present its own questions. Is anything wrong in this exact moment? Is there breath? Is there ground beneath my feet? Are my hands empty of harm? There were nights when the answer was yes to all, and still fear insisted. On those nights, he practiced the discipline of small tasks. Fold the cloth. Set the bowl where it belongs. Straighten the mat. He found that order in reach helps keep order in mind. The year wheeled. He learned how to prepare for winter without making winter into a god. He learned how much grain was enough, how to bundle wood so that a single armful warms twice. Once when you carry it, again when you burn it. Fear tried to turn preparation into obsession. He learned to leave a basket half empty without believing he had failed. Enough is not a number. It is a relationship with the day. He began to understand the difference between safety and peace. Safety is a door with a bar across it. Peace is the knowledge of where to place the bar and the willingness to open the door in the morning. He had confused them. He had chased safety as if it could purchase peace. Now he suspected peace must be grown, like a slow tree whose shade you will one day sit under if you keep watering what does not dazzle. At the harvest feast, people told old stories, because old stories have learned how to stand without leaning. The boy listened from the edge where light thins into plain dark. Someone spoke of a ridge far beyond the last field, a place the bold call the Mountain of Silence. The story did not plead. It simply said, there is a place where even thought walks softly. No one asked the mountain to be magic. It only needed to be itself. The boy carried that notion with him. the way an ember travels inside a covered bowl from one fire to the next. He did not know it yet, but a traveler had already woken in him. Before such a traveler leaves, there is a long season of invisible preparation. He did not announce anything to himself. He simply adjusted his life by degrees. He walked a little farther at dusk. He stood a little longer at the threshold when wind spoke its opinions. He looked into water and reminded himself that water reflects whatever stands above it, and that the reflection is not the thing. He taught his eyes to stay when the body wanted to flee. He taught his breath to widen when his chest wanted to tighten. He taught his attention to notice the difference between a sound and the story he fastens to it. He also cataloged the behaviors that grew fear. Too much talk about what might happen. Too little sleep. Too little work of the kind that matters. Too much imagining without a finishing line. He learned to trim his diet of rumors. He learned that fatigue adds shadows to every corner, and that rest is not a luxury. It is a kind of courage. There were days of fog when the village narrowed to a handful of shapes, and the boy once lost his way along a path he had walked since childhood. Panic rose like a bird that mistook a window for the sky. He stopped walking. He stood still. He listened for a sound he knew. He heard water trouble a stone. He knew the shape of that sound. He followed it, not quickly, not cleverly, just steadily. The fog did not clear to reward him. He arrived home, wet and wiser. He wrote a sentence in himself that day that he would use again and again. When you cannot see, decrease your speed, not your attention. He fixed small things before they became large. A hinge taught him that a drop of oil today saves a wrestle tomorrow. A frayed rope taught him that neglect is a slow fire you cannot see until it eats the beam from the inside. These were not grand lessons, but they were faithful. Fear retreated a step for every such lesson because fear loses authority where maintenance is loved. He learned the grief of small losses that nobody marks on calendars. A favorite cup that breaks, a tool left in rain that rusts despite your apology. The first time a task that was once easy asks for more of your back than you expected. Fear tried to multiply those into prophecies of collapse. The boy answered by sweeping the shards, oiling the tool, stretching his back, and giving thanks out loud for what still works. Gratitude is not denial. It is a boundary you place around despair. There were times when he looked at his reflection in still water and did not recognize the boy he had been. Fear tried to sell him a story about disappearing, about how changing is the same as vanishing. He realized that this story is popular because it is easy. It asks for nothing but regret. He chose a different story. Changing is the same as arriving. He considered what it means to be brave. He had thought bravery had the color of fire and the volume of drums. Now he suspected bravery might look like a person washing their bowl properly after a meal, even on a day when sorrow had made salt of everything. Bravery might sound like a voice saying a simple truth without decoration. Bravery might be a person who returns a tool to its place even when no one is watching, so that tomorrow is not lost looking for what was used today. He saw that bravery is the poetry of ordinary things done faithfully in the presence of fear. In quiet hours, he allowed himself to imagine the ridge beyond the last field. He did not tell himself a legend. He told himself something simpler. There may be a place where fear cannot pretend to be more than it is. Perhaps it is not the ridge itself that holds the secret, but the long walking toward it, the places on the road where the mind runs out of its usual games and must learn new ones. The thought did not excite him. It steadied him. Excitement burns fast. Steadiness burns long. He practiced being alone without declaring himself lonely. He practiced being with others without abandoning himself to every noise that group life makes. He found a seat in himself without a backrest and sat there until his posture improved. He began to speak with fear as if fear were part of the household, not bargaining, not threatening, not pleading, simple acknowledgement. I see you. I hear what you predict. I note your favorite words. Always, never, ruin, loss. I note how seldom your predictions match the day that actually arrives. You may sit near the door. I am going to work now. If real danger arrives, you may raise your voice. If not, your whispers will be treated as weather. He practiced the craft that best taught him patience. For him, it was the knife and the wood. A handle does not rush into its final shape because the hand is eager. The hand must learn the shape by touching it again and again, feeling where there is too much and where there is not yet enough. Mistakes cannot be undone by wishing. They can only be sanded into a different kind of usefulness. He learned to make use of what he had spoiled by making something smaller but strong. Fear hates such lessons because they deny it the pleasure of declaring a thing ruined. In the middle of a long summer, a storm made the fields taste like metal. The sky practiced its anger, and the horizon disappeared. He did what work demanded while the world rehearsed its old threats. And he remembered his childhood nights listening for footsteps that never arrived. He noticed that the body can be brave if the hands are occupied. He promised himself to keep a list of tasks that are both useful and steadying. Tasks that do not require brilliance, only honesty. A person with a broom and a purpose is far less available to panic. At the first cool of autumn, he felt something like a knot inside him loosen by an inch. He had not read a philosophy to produce this effect. He had not won an argument. He had simply lived, and while living, he had watched himself live. Observation, he discovered, is not cold. It is a kind of love. To watch without cruelty is the beginning of peace. He returned to the well at dusk, not to test himself now, but to converse with the part of himself that still chose the old story. He leaned on the stone that held the village's thirst and allowed the dark to be only dark. He did not decorate it with teeth. He allowed the question, what lives where light does not, to change shape. He replaced the word what with a quieter word, who. Who lives where light does not? The answer arrived without impatience. The same person who lives where light does, the one who is asking. There is nowhere you will go that you will not meet yourself. He found that this answer did not make him proud. It made him gentle. If the thing he feared most was his own unexamined mind, then the way forward was neither conquest nor surrender, but companionship. He would have to become a companion to himself in places he had previously abandoned himself. Winter approached, and the roofs learned the white language again. The short days gathered people closer to their lamps. He practiced a kind of evening he had resisted before, an evening without noise. He sat. He allowed boredom to arrive and teach what it knows. Boredom said, "You have made fear your entertainment. Learn another one." He listened. He learned to find fascination in the way a flame holds itself upright, in the way a cup returns to silence after being set down, in the way breath continues whether thanked or not. He did not think himself holy for such evenings. He thought himself a student who had at last stopped skipping the class he disliked because the subject made him feel slow. He allowed himself to be slow. He discovered that slowness is not stupidity. It is a form of accuracy. Sometimes on those quiet nights, a memory visited, a hand on his shoulder that had once told him without words that the world is large and that steadiness is a kind of home you carry with you. He did not argue with the memory. He let it do its work. He learned that the past can be a tool if you choose which parts you keep in the top drawer. He also learned the cost of pretending. Once, he laughed at a joke he did not find kind because he feared the pause that would follow honesty. The pause came anyway. He carried that pause for a week. Fear offered him an easier path. Lie again next time, make a habit of it, and you will never feel the pause. He declined. He chose to tolerate the pause. He discovered that truth has its own furniture. If you stand in a room long enough, you will find where to sit. With the year nearly finished, the boy, who was no longer a boy, though he had not noticed the day that change became true, stood before the threshold of his house and watched the village exhale. Lamps dimmed. Dogs rearranged their tiredness. Somewhere a pot gave a last polite sigh. The sky was a black cloth with holes poked in it by patient hands. He looked toward the direction of the ridge the elders had once mentioned. He did not decide anything dramatic. He allowed a quiet willingness to find its seat. Sometimes life begins not with a vow, but with a posture. He went to his mat and lay down and dreamed, not the kind of dream that colors itself wildly, but the kind that is almost a memory of a thing that has not happened yet. He dreamed of a bench made of ordinary stone on a high place where the wind for once had nothing to say. He sat on that bench and did not ask the day to be other than it was. He woke with that feeling in his chest, a feeling that did not demand, only suggested. He recognized it. Courage often arrives disguised as a suggestion. Morning came. He swept the floor. He mended a strap. He checked a bucket handle. He did not announce to himself that he would soon leave. He trained his life in the direction of leaving by taking care of what leaving would require: fewer things to trip over, fewer debts of attention unpaid, a room that would welcome his return because he had not left it angry. He understood that departure has a way of telling the truth about how you lived before you left. He went to the well once more at dusk. He placed both hands on the cold stone and breathed until breath felt like a task and not a demand. He let fear make its usual offering. It offered pictures. He let them pass without purchase. He offered his own picture in exchange: a road, a slow stride, a person who does not run. He did not negotiate. He blessed the stones with simple thanks and walked home. And there, beside the clay lamp that had taught him about light and its necessary shadow, he sat and allowed a sentence to finish itself inside him. He did not say it aloud because saying it aloud would have made it loud, and he did not need loud. The sentence was this: I will prepare to meet myself in the places I have avoided. That was all. It was enough. He slept as one sleeps who has moved the furniture of the heart into a better arrangement. He woke as one wakes who will keep moving it, not because the old arrangement was evil, but because the new arrangement makes it easier to reach the door when the morning knocks. This is how the beginning ends, not with a flourish, not with applause, not with proof. With a boy who has become a man without noticing when, a man who has learned that fear is loudest where there is least work of the honest kind, a man who has learned to give fear a chair near the door and not the keys to the house. He is not fearless. He is prepared. He will walk soon. When he does, fear will walk too. But it will walk behind him, not ahead. The boy grew into a young man. It did not happen all at once, not on a morning when the sun declared, "Now you are changed." No, it happened slowly, like a tree that thickens each year but never notices its own rings. His hands, once soft, became shaped by work. His shoulders carried loads with less complaint. His step was heavier, not from sorrow, but from gravity's growing friendship with him. And still, fear did not leave with childhood. It only chose new garments to wear. When he was a boy, fear came in storms and shadows, in the hush around a well at dusk. Now, as he stood taller, fear arrived in subtler ways. It lived in silence between people. It dressed itself in expectation, in responsibility, in the pressure of watchful eyes. Fear does not vanish with age. It only becomes more skilled at disguises. He discovered this during a harvest feast. The whole village gathered in the square. It was a time of gratitude, a pause in the cycle of toil, a chance for laughter and songs. There was bread, there was grain, there was stew that smelled of herbs and smoke. The young man's heart was warm in his chest. Then, without warning, someone asked him to speak. It was a simple request, a few words of thanks, perhaps a short blessing. Others had spoken before him, men and women with voices strong from years of weather and labor. He rose to his feet, and in that moment, fear placed its hand on his throat. His mind knew words. His heart carried gratitude. But his body betrayed him. His tongue dried. His voice weakened. His eyes saw only the weight of every gaze. The words came out thin, half swallowed by the shuffling of feet. When he sat down, relief rushed in like water breaking a dam. But along with relief came shame, quiet and heavy. He had not fallen. He had not failed. Yet he had allowed fear to own the moment. He had survived, but survival without strength tasted bitter. That night, when lamps dimmed and the village slept, he lay awake and thought, "What power does fear truly have if it can silence me without laying a hand upon me?" He turned the thought again and again as one turns a stone in the palm. He realized that fear had won not by force, but by suggestion. It whispered, "If you speak, you will stumble. If you stumble, they will laugh. If they laugh, you will never recover." He believed the whispers, and belief was all fear required. This was his first deep understanding. Fear does not need weapons. It needs cooperation. It rules by invitation. And so he began to notice how often he cooperated. When the sky grew dark with clouds, he did not simply see the promise of rain. He saw ruined fields, barren barns, hunger crouching in the corners of winter. Fear loved such moments. His hands kept planting, but his mind worked against him, conjuring futures that never existed. The rains came, as rains always come. The fields gave enough, not always plenty, but always enough to endure. And in those seasons he learned that most of what fear promises never arrives. Fear is a poor prophet, yet it convinces us by speaking loudly. But fear has many instruments. It does not always roar with thunder. Sometimes it hides in waiting. He discovered this when a neighbor fell ill. The sickness was not immediately grave, but uncertainty filled the air like smoke. He visited, brought food, helped tend the fire. Yet when he returned home, the silence became unbearable. He paced, he imagined endings. He surrendered his nights to scenarios that never came, and he realized the waiting itself was heavier than the illness. Fear thrives in uncertainty. In the space between question and answer, it multiplies. It paints pictures of endings before endings exist. That is its favorite soil. Another lesson came not from storms or sickness, but from silence of another kind, the silence between people. There were truths he longed to speak, doubts, affections, corrections, but his tongue would not move. Fear whispered, "If you speak, you will be misunderstood. If you confess, you will be rejected. If you correct, you will invite anger." And so he swallowed his words, and the silence grew inside him like a stone. He discovered that unspoken truths are not harmless. They sharpen their teeth in the dark. They return in the night, gnawing at the heart, reminding you of every missed chance. Fear pretends silence is safety, but silence can be its own poison. He decided to test this. One evening, with a voice that trembled like a branch in the wind, he spoke one simple truth to someone he trusted. The earth did not split. The sky did not fall. The truth was received. It was not rejected. In that moment, he learned a second revelation. The greater loss lies not in speaking, but in forever remaining silent. Fear shifted again. It began to walk with him at dusk. The road he had walked since childhood stretched past the well, past the reeds, into a place where trees leaned close together. That path had always whispered of danger. His chest tightened when he entered, his steps quickened, his mind filled the silence with watchers. One evening, he did not turn back as early as usual. He walked a few steps farther, then a few more. His legs shook, but he pressed forward until his courage was spent. When he turned back, nothing had happened. The trees had not moved. The reeds had not spoken. The silence had not become a voice. That night, he lay awake and thought, "It is not the night that frightens me. It is the story I tell myself about the night." And so he began to learn a new truth. Danger and fear are not the same. Danger can harm the body, but fear mostly harms the mind. Danger ends when the moment ends. Fear lingers before and after, stealing hours from life. He looked again at the elders. Their faces bore the map of survival, wrinkles like furrows, laughter lines carved alongside sorrow. They spoke of storms that had taken roofs, of sickness that had taken children, of hunger that had bent them thin. Yet when they spoke, they did not tremble. Their voices did not stutter. They had endured true dangers, yet he trembled at imagined ones. How strange, he thought, that the weight of what might be could crush harder than the weight of what already is. That is when he discovered a third truth. The mind can suffer more in imagination than the body suffers in reality. The elders carried wounds of the real. He carried wounds of the unreal. And the unreal was endless. So he began small experiments. When fear rose at a sound in the night, he did not leap up. He sat. He breathed. He listened. When fear whispered of failing in the fields, he reminded himself, the harvest belongs to the earth, not to the mind's anxious rehearsals. When fear tried to silence him in conversation, he allowed at least one sentence to cross his lips, no matter how imperfect. Each act was not victory, but practice. And practice is how a door learns to open without groaning. One evening, he returned to the well. For years, it had been his enemy, a circle of stone holding darkness deeper than his courage. This time, he placed both hands on its rim. He leaned forward and looked in. His heart pounded, his thoughts filled with creatures waiting below. He stayed. He breathed. He did not run. The darkness remained silent. Nothing rose, nothing reached. It was only water. The fear was his, not the well's. He walked home slowly, carrying a new understanding. Fear is not in the world. Fear is in me. And if it is in me, then I can change how I meet it. That night, he did not claim victory, but he allowed himself the smallest of smiles, for he had touched fear and survived the touch. Seasons kept turning, as they always do. Time does not ask your permission to pass. It moves as the river moves, sometimes swift, sometimes slow, but always onward. The young man learned the rhythm of tasks, how to tie knots that did not slip, how to sharpen a blade until it was both precise and patient, how to carry burdens so that one shoulder did not grow jealous of the other. But even as skill grew in his hands, fear remained restless in his chest. He noticed how fear attached itself not to the task, but to the thought before the task. Lifting wood was simple when he simply lifted it. But before his hands touched the bundle, fear whispered of strain, of stumble, of failure. Speaking truth was simple when the words left his mouth. But before the first syllable, fear painted pictures of ridicule and rejection. Fear is strongest in the pause before action. It multiplies in hesitation. One morning, while helping repair the roof of a neighbor's house, he was asked to climb and hold the beams steady. His body was capable, his balance was sure. But as he placed his foot on the ladder, fear sent a rush of images. The rungs snapping, his fall breaking bone, the village watching as he lay helpless. He froze halfway up. His hands gripped wood that shook only because he shook it. He wanted to climb down, to retreat into safety. But then he remembered the bridge, the way each plank had groaned beneath him, the way he had told himself, "If I must fall, let it be while walking forward." And so he took one more step, then another. When he reached the roof and the work began, he discovered the task itself carried no fear. Only the thought of it had. Later that night, reflecting on the day, he understood. Fear is a thief that lives at the gate of action. Once you enter the field of doing, it loses its grip. This truth followed him into the quiet corners of life. When he wished to speak kindness to someone, fear delayed him. It whispered, "What if they misunderstand? What if they mock you?" And if he listened too long, the moment passed, and the kindness remained locked inside him. But when he spoke quickly, before fear could build its walls, the kindness landed where it was meant to land. Fear's power is in delay. He also began to notice how fear disguised itself as caution. When friends asked him to walk further into the forest, he said no. Fear whispered that caution was wisdom, that safety was prudence. But later, when they returned laughing, carrying wood and berries, he felt not wise, but diminished. True caution is grounded in reality. False caution is only fear in disguise. He learned that wisdom looks outward to the world, but fear looks inward to its own trembling. One winter evening, the silence of the village was broken by a cry. A child had wandered too close to the frozen pond and fallen through thin ice. The young man was among those who rushed to the shore. His heart pounded. Fear screamed of drowning, of failure, of death. But he saw another man leap forward without hesitation, breaking the ice, pulling the child free. The rescuer shivered with cold, but his voice was steady as he handed the child to waiting arms. The young man stood frozen, realizing that fear had chained him when action was required. He had wanted to move, but fear had held him. That night, he thought deeply. When danger is real, fear can paralyze, but courage is the decision to act before fear finishes its argument. From that day, he began to practice swifter action, not recklessness, but refusal to let fear delay him. If a door needed to be opened, he opened it. If a step needed to be taken, he took it. If a truth needed to be spoken, he spoke it before fear could silence him. He learned that courage is often nothing more than speed, the speed to act before fear prepares its full speech. Still, fear was cunning. It found new rooms to haunt. It moved into his thoughts about the future. As he worked the fields, it whispered, "What if next year fails? What if storms grow stronger? What if sickness comes?" The future became heavy, even while the present was bearable. He realized then that fear often lives not in the moment you are living, but in the moment you have not yet reached. It steals life by demanding that you suffer twice, once in imagination and once in reality. And so he began another practice, the discipline of the present. When fear spoke of tomorrow, he answered with today. Are my hands working now? Is there bread on the table now? Is breath still moving through me now? Each time, the answer steadied him. The future would bring its own demands, but they need not be paid in advance with dread. One evening, he lingered at the well longer than before. He leaned over the stones and looked deep into the black water. His chest pounded, his skin prickled, but he remained. Fear shouted its usual stories, creatures in the dark, voices rising from below. He allowed them to speak, but he did not obey. He stood long enough for his racing heart to slow, for his breath to even, for silence to become only silence again. When he walked away that night, he knew something had shifted. Fear had not vanished, but its mask had slipped. He had looked into it, and it had not destroyed him. That realization was small, but it was his. And so, his early encounters with fear taught him this. Fear thrives in imagination, in silence, in hesitation, in the pause before action. But each time he faced it directly, whether by climbing, speaking, or waiting, it grew smaller. Still, fear was not done. It returned in new forms, always learning, always adjusting. And he too was learning. He began to see fear not as a curse, but as a teacher that demanded attention. It was a hard teacher, but not a useless one. He learned that fear is a mirror. It reflects not the world, but the way you see it. If you see the night as danger, the night becomes danger. If you see silence as threat, silence becomes threat. But if you sit long enough, you see that the mirror is only glass. It shows you your own face wearing fear's expression. And in those early years, he discovered the most important truth of all. You do not conquer fear in one battle. You meet it again and again in different disguises, in different moments. And each time you remain standing, each time you breathe, each time you act despite its whisper, you take back a little more of your life. There are seasons when the lessons of fear arrive not as storms, but as whispers in the small events of life. The young man did not yet know he was training. He only thought he was living. But every day, fear laid stones in the path, and with every step, he he learned which stones were heavy and which were hollow. One such lesson came during a hunt. The village depended sometimes on the wild, for grain and flocks could not provide everything. The men gathered with spears, and the young man went with them. His heart was eager to prove itself, but beneath that eagerness lived fear. Fear painted images, the beast charging, his body failing, the shame of retreat. When the hunt began, the forest was thick with silence. The air itself seemed to wait, and in that waiting, fear grew. Every branch crack became a roar in his mind. Every movement in the grass became a threat. He tightened his grip on the spear, not from readiness, but from trembling. When the animal finally broke cover, a deer startled by their presence, it fled, and the hunters pursued. The young man ran, but his chest was bound by fear's grip. He saw only the fall that might come, the antlers that might strike. He threw his spear clumsily, and it struck nothing. Others succeeded where he had not, and the deer was taken. They returned with meat, but he returned with shame, not because he had missed, but because he had allowed fear to aim his hand instead of skill. That night, he thought long. Fear does not only silence the tongue, it also weakens the arm. It steals strength not by taking it, but by convincing you it is already gone. And so he began another practice. He trained himself to pause when fear rose, to breathe before acting. He discovered that breath is a quiet master. When you follow it, fear loses rhythm. Breath cannot banish fear, but it can steady the hand that must act in its presence. Another trial came in the form of waiting news. A caravan had left the village, carrying goods to trade, and among the travelers was a friend dear to him. Days passed, then weeks. No word came. Fear whispered, "They are lost, they are robbed, they are dead." The young man found himself waking in the night, rehearsing grief for a death not yet real. At last, the caravan returned, delayed but safe. His friend laughed at his worry as if it were wasted, and perhaps it was, but the young man had gained a truth. Fear often demands payment in advance for tragedies that never arrive, and when the day comes and tragedy does not, you have paid twice, once to fear, once to time. He told himself, "I will no longer pay before the debt is due." Still, fear was not so easily dismissed. It found him in moments of joy as well. Once, he walked with a young woman by the river, someone whose presence warmed him in ways he had never known. She spoke, laughed, asked him questions, but inside, fear whispered, "What if she sees your weakness? What if she turns away? What if she chooses another?" He stumbled in his words, not because he had nothing to say, but because fear filled his mouth with silence. That evening, he realized that fear had stolen even joy, and he asked himself, "How much of life have I not lived, not because it was denied me, but because I denied myself?" He made a vow that day to test fear not only in danger, but in love, in kindness, in joy. For fear does not only keep us from harm, it keeps us from fullness. And so he began to look at his days differently. Each time fear rose, he asked, "What is it stealing from me now?" Sometimes it was words, sometimes laughter, sometimes peace, and the asking itself became a kind of light that revealed fear's theft. He discovered also that fear grows louder when life grows quieter. On days when work was heavy and his hands were busy, fear found little room. But on days when tasks were few, it multiplied. He saw that idleness is fertile soil for fear, and so he learned to keep small tasks close, sweeping, carving, mending, so that his attention had a home. This does not mean he fled from stillness. He learned instead to meet stillness with presence. He would sit by the river, watch its slow current, breathe with it. At first, fear would rise, filling silence with its inventions. But if he sat long enough, fear grew tired, and silence revealed itself not as enemy, but as companion. This became another truth. Fear cannot endure long patience. It burns quickly, but it cannot burn forever. If you remain, it fades. One evening, when the moon was thin, he walked again past the well. He stopped. He leaned over and looked into the black water. This time, instead of shrinking back, he spoke aloud, not to the well, but to himself. "You are not my enemy. You are only a reflection." The water gave no answer, but he felt the words steady him. Speaking truth, even to oneself, is a kind of victory. Fear loses ground each time we dare to name it. The villagers noticed changes in him. He was not suddenly bold. He was not suddenly fearless. But he lingered longer at the places that once hurried him. He spoke a little louder when asked to share his thoughts. He no longer laughed nervously at every silence. The changes were small, but steady. And so his early encounters with fear shaped him. They taught him that fear does not vanish. It evolves. It hides in silence, in waiting, in joy, in imagination. But he learned also that each encounter carries a lesson. If you face it, even for a breath longer than before, you grow. This was the truth of his youth. He was not fearless, but he was learning. Learning that fear is not the master of life, but the mirror of it. Learning that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep walking with it. And though the road of his life stretched far beyond that village, the foundation was laid in those early years. A boy who trembled at shadows becoming a young man who dared to meet them. Fear is not content with a single disguise. Once you begin to see through one mask, it sews another. And so the young man found that even as he grew more practiced in speaking, more willing to face silence, more steady before the well, fear slipped quietly into other corners of his life. It found him in the marketplace. Traders from other villages came with carts of fabric, tools, and spices. Their voices were loud, their gestures broad, their stories stretched across lands he had never seen. When they asked his price for grain or wood, he hesitated. Fear whispered, "If you speak too high, they will laugh at you. If you speak too low, they will cheat you. Better to stay quiet. Let someone else speak." And so he stood back, letting others bargain. At day's end, he earned less than he might have, and he carried not only a lighter purse, but also a heavier regret. That night, he said to himself, "I lost twice, once to fear's silence and once to the world's indifference." He realized then that fear does not only steal moments of courage, it also steals bread from your table. And bread lost to fear is harder to forgive than words left unspoken. So he practiced. The next market day, when a trader offered him a poor price, he answered clearly, "No, this is worth more." His voice shook, but he did not retreat. The trader frowned, hesitated, then agreed to a better sum. The young man walked home not rich, but steady. Fear had lost a little ground. Another disguise of fear appeared in friendship. There were moments when he saw a companion walk down a dangerous path of thought or choice. Fear whispered, "Stay silent. If you speak, You may lose his friendship. If you warn him, he may grow angry. Better to let him go his way, but silence is not kindness. He remembered the pause that had bitten him in the past, the truth left unsaid. So, trembling, he spoke. He said, "I do not think this is wise." His friend frowned, then walked away. For days, silence stretched between them. Fear laughed. "You see, you have lost what you valued." But weeks later, that same friend returned. His eyes were softer. He said, "You were right. I was angry because I knew you spoke truth. Thank you for not letting me walk alone into harm." And the young man learned another truth. Fear protects you only from discomfort, not from consequence. Better to endure the discomfort of honesty than the consequence of silence. Fear also visited him in the solitude of night. There were evenings when the wind stilled, when even the animals hushed, when the silence grew so thick it seemed to breathe. In that silence, fear told its old stories, shapes in the dark, footsteps in the hall, eyes in the forest. His body tensed, his breath shortened, but then he asked himself, what is here, truly here in this moment? A roof, a mat, the rhythm of my breath? Nothing more, nothing less. He discovered that naming what is present weakens what is imagined. Fear hates clarity. It thrives in vagueness. When you say, "This is wood, this is wind, this is breath," fear loses the canvas on which it paints. So he made a habit of naming. Each time fear rose, he named the real. A creak was wood shifting in the cold. A shadow was a tree bending under moonlight. A silence was simply silence. By naming, he tethered himself to the present, and the present proved itself stronger than imagination. But perhaps the sharpest lesson of those years came with love. The young man's heart leaned quietly toward a woman in the village. He noticed her laughter, the way she carried water with grace, the way she listened more than she spoke. His chest filled with words he longed to share, but fear whispered, "If you speak, she may turn away. If she turns away, you will be shamed. Better to keep your feelings hidden where no one can wound them." So he stayed silent. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. He watched her from a distance, carrying his affection like a flame cupped in trembling hands. But flames, unfed, grow small. One day he learned that she had chosen another, someone who had spoken, someone who had dared. That night, sorrow visited him, not because she had chosen, for choice is hers, but because fear had robbed him of even the chance. He realized then that fear does not only guard you from pain, it also denies you joy. It does not only keep out sorrow, it keeps out love. He swore then that he would no longer let fear choose silence where love asked for words. Better to speak and lose than to remain silent and never try. Better to be wounded by truth than haunted by what if. And so he grew, slowly, unevenly, but surely. Fear still came, but he no longer mistook it for a god. He saw it for what it was, a shadow cast by his own life. He discovered one more truth. Fear has patterns. It rises strongest in the pause before action, in the silence between words, in the waiting for news, in the imagining of futures. And each time, the answer is the same. Step forward, speak truth, breathe the present, act with love. He did not conquer fear once and for all. No man does. But he learned to wrestle with it and not be broken. He learned to walk with it and not be led. He learned to sit with it and not be consumed. And in this way, his early encounters with fear became his first victories, not loud, not celebrated, but quiet and steady. Victories that no one else saw, but that shaped the man he was becoming. Fear never abandons a man once it has found him. It waits, shifting shape, adjusting its voice. And so the young man discovered that just when he thought he had learned fear's favorite disguises, new ones arrived. That is the way of shadows. They stretch into every corner unless you bring a lamp into each one. The turning of another year brought fresh lessons. Winter bit the village harder than before. Food stores grew thin. Work became heavy, not with abundance, but with necessity. The young man rose before dawn to split wood, to mend tools, to carry water through snow. His body ached, but it was not the labor that made him tremble. It was the whispers of fear. What if the wood runs out? What if the river freezes too deep? What if spring never returns? He found himself walking from house to house, measuring the faces of neighbors, searching their eyes for signs of despair. Fear tried to turn every quiet conversation into a prophecy of ruin. But spring did return, as it always does. The earth thawed, shoots rose, and he realized how many hours of life he had wasted living in winters that had not yet arrived. He learned a great truth then. Fear is always too early. It rushes ahead to a future that has not yet unfolded, and in doing so, it steals the present. Courage, therefore, is not the denial of the future. It is the decision to remain in today. The lesson deepened when his father fell ill. The illness was not sudden, but slow, stretching over weeks. Each day his father weakened. Each day fear rehearsed grief in the young man's heart. He imagined funerals, imagined loss, imagined his own helplessness. He carried sorrow for a future that had not yet come. And in carrying it, he found himself less present to his father, who still lived, still breathed, still needed his hand and voice. One evening, sitting beside the bed, he realized, fear has stolen the very time I have left with him. I am grieving a man who is not yet left, and in grieving early, I abandon him while he still remains. So he chose differently. He sat with his father not as one waiting for death, but as one honoring life. He listened to old stories, laughed at old memories, asked questions he had never asked before. When the day of parting did finally come, sorrow was heavy, but he carried no regret. He had been present to the end. Fear had not stolen those final hours. That was perhaps his most precious victory. He learned that fear of loss can make us lose twice, once before and once after. But if we live fully in the time given, loss comes only once, and love remains unbroken. Another mask of fear appeared in comparison. As he worked, he noticed others stronger, faster, more skilled. Fear whispered, "You are less. You will never be enough. Others will surpass you, and you will fade unnoticed." He felt small in his own life, but then he remembered the elders, how their strength had faded, yet their wisdom remained. He remembered his father, how his hands no longer worked as they once had, yet his stories carried weight. And he realized fear thrives in comparison, because comparison is a shadow with no end. There will always be someone stronger, faster, more gifted. But courage is not measured against another. It is measured against yesterday. If you walk one step further than before, you have grown. If you speak one word braver than before, you have conquered. The measure is not the world. The measure is yourself. He began to walk differently after that, not proudly, but steadily. He stopped asking, "Am I as strong as him?" and started asking, "Am I stronger than I was?" Fear grew weaker in that shift. for fear had lost one of its favorite tools, the endless ladder of comparison. But fear is patient. It does not retreat entirely. It only waits for night. And so many evenings still found him at the edge of dread. He would lie awake, the house quiet, the lamp burned out, shadows thick around him. Fear would creep in with old whispers. Something waits in the dark. Something approaches. Something unseen will undo you. But instead of fighting, he began to listen differently. He said to himself, "This is not the world speaking. This is fear speaking with my voice." And he would breathe slowly, name what was real. I am here. I am breathing. I am safe in this moment. He found that when he stopped wrestling fear and simply watched it, fear lost much of its power. It became like a child throwing stones into water, loud but harmless. Still, the greatest test of this period was yet to come. One summer evening, as the village gathered for songs, a stranger arrived. He was a traveler with weathered skin and tired eyes, carrying stories from places beyond the horizon. The villagers welcomed him, as was their custom, and asked for tales. He spoke of mountains so high the clouds rested upon them, of seas so vast that a man could sail for weeks and see no land. And then he spoke of a place he called the Mountain of Silence. He said it was far past valleys and rivers, beyond the reach of most men. He said those who climbed it met not beasts, not storms, but themselves. He said it was a place where fear had no walls to hide behind. The villagers laughed, nodded, passed bread. To them it was a tale to season the evening, but to the young man it was a seed. That night, as he lay awake, he felt the seed press into his heart, a place where fear cannot hide. He realized that all his early encounters had been only rehearsals. The well, the storms, the silence, the sickness, the comparisons, these were training. But one day, a greater trial would come. One day, he would have to walk not only into fear's whispers, but into its heart. And so he prepared, quietly, slowly, without fanfare. He began to walk longer distances at dusk. He carried less food, teaching himself hunger. He sat longer in silence, teaching himself patience. He looked at fear not as a curse, but as a teacher he was preparing to graduate from. The villagers noticed his changes. They saw him pause longer at the well, linger in shadows, speak more directly, stand more steadily. They said little, but they felt something stirring in him. Perhaps they thought it was youth, or perhaps they knew what he did not yet fully know, that he was preparing for departure. For departure always begins inside. Long before the feet leave, the heart has already started walking. And this was how his early encounters with fear came to their great conclusion. He was not fearless. He was not yet wise, but he was no longer ruled as he once had been. He had learned that fear is loudest in silence, but silence is not an enemy. That fear is strongest before action, but action weakens it. That fear feeds on comparison, but comparison is a lie. That fear demands payment in advance, but life rarely asks for such a toll. That fear steals love if left unchallenged, but courage reclaims it. These were not victories to boast of. No one sang of them, no one carved his name into stone, but they were victories nonetheless. Quiet victories, deep victories, the kind that build the foundation of a life. And so, by the time he first heard of the Mountain of Silence, he was already readying himself, not by grand decisions, but by small ones, not by conquering fear, but by learning its nature. The boy who once trembled at shadows had become a man who could stand in their presence. The man who once surrendered words to silence had become one who could speak truth, even if his voice shook. He was not yet the man who would conquer fear, but he was becoming him. There comes a time in every life when the walls of the familiar grow too narrow. The same paths, the same tasks, the same rhythms no longer answer the questions that rise in the chest. The young man reached such a time. It was not one moment that changed him, not a sudden flash of lightning or a voice from the heavens. It was a slow accumulation, like rain filling a jar drop by drop. Each encounter with fear had been a lesson. Each night of trembling, each day of silence, each test in the marketplace, each whisper in love, these were stones laid upon his heart. And one evening, when he looked toward the horizon, he felt the weight of all those stones press against him. He knew he could not remain. The traveler's story of the mountain of silence had not left him. It lingered in his mind like an ember that refused to go out. The idea that there was a place where fear revealed its true face haunted him, but not with dread, rather with invitation. He understood. If he stayed, fear would always follow him in familiar forms. If he left, he might find its root. And so, quietly, without ceremony, he prepared. He told no one. Departure, when it is true, begins long before words. He mended the strap on his bag. He saved crusts of bread. He sharpened his knife. He sat in silence each evening, not to fight fear, but to train in waiting. On the morning he chose, the village was still. The air carried the smell of dew and wood smoke. He rose before dawn, wrapped bread in cloth, tied the knife at his belt, and stepped onto the road. No one stopped him. No one asked where he went. Villages often know when a man must leave, even before he knows it himself. The first steps felt lighter than he expected. Behind him, the well, the fields, the square, all the places where fear had trained him, receded into memory. Ahead, the road stretched like an unwritten page. For a moment, he thought perhaps distance itself was the answer, that if he walked far enough, fear would not follow. But fear needs no roads. It travels with the mind. By the second day, he felt it. The road carried him through meadows where grass bent under the wind, through groves where birds darted from branch to branch. Yet even in such beauty, fear whispered, "What if you lose the path? What if food runs out? What if no one welcomes you?" He tightened his bag, quickened his pace, but the whispers followed. He discovered that leaving the village had not left fear behind. It had only changed the scenery. His first true trial came at a bridge. It was made of wood, worn dark with years, stretched over a river swollen by spring rains. As he placed his foot on the first plank, it groaned. His heart answered with its own groan. The river below frothed and snarled, the sound of water trying to tear stone from stone. Fear rushed in with its pictures, the plank breaking, his body falling, the water closing over his head. He froze. His breath came fast. His knees trembled. The bridge seemed longer with each heartbeat. He thought of turning back, but then he remembered the well. He remembered the nights of silence when he had stayed a breath longer than before. He remembered the words he had once told himself. "If I must fall, let it be walking forward." So he stepped again. Each plank moaned beneath him. Each gust of wind swayed the bridge. Fear shouted louder, "You will fall. You will drown. You will not return. But step by step he crossed. And when his feet touched the earth on the other side, he did not shout in victory. He did not smile in triumph. He simply breathed steady and deep, for he understood. The river was not conquered. The bridge was not conquered. Only fear had been met, and he had walked forward anyway. The road continued. Days turned into nights, nights into days. Sometimes he slept beneath trees, the stars pressing their cold light upon him. Sometimes he found shelter in barns or beneath ledges. Hunger visited him, not as a roar, but as a steady knocking at his ribs. Thirst came sharper, cracking his lips, drying his tongue. And fear came too. Fear is clever. It does not always shout about storms or beasts. Sometimes it whispers through loneliness. On nights when the fire would not catch, when silence pressed close, fear said, "You are alone. You are forgotten. No one knows if you live or die." Those were the hardest nights, for loneliness is a fear that does not use teeth. It uses emptiness. One such night, he found a cave carved into a hillside. Grateful for shelter, he entered, laid his head on the ground, and drifted into sleep. But dreams came. Dreams of the walls closing in, of stone pressing against his chest, of air running thin. He woke with a cry, heart pounding as though chased. The cave was silent, but fear was not. It whispered, "This is what awaits you. You will be trapped, crushed, suffocated." He sat for hours, back against the stone, whispering to himself, "It was only a dream. It was only a dream." But fear does not care whether its mask is stone or a dream. It only cares that you believe. In the morning, he stepped back onto the road, weary but wiser. He realized that fear is not limited to waking. It follows into sleep. It is not bound by the day or the night. It is bound only by the mind. By the seventh day, he met his reflection. It was not in a mirror, but in a pool of still water across the path. He bent to drink, but when he saw his face, he froze, for it was not his face as he knew it. The reflection was twisted, eyes wide with dread, shoulders hunched, lips pressed thin. It was himself, but wearing the mask of fear. He stared. The reflection stared back. For a moment, he felt as though it might reach up and drag him down. But then he realized, "This is who I become when I let fear lead me." He did not drink. Instead, he sat beside the pool until the ripples broke the image, until the face dissolved. And he spoke aloud, softly, to himself. "If fear is only another version of me, then I do not need to destroy it. I only need to know it." From then on, he began to speak to fear as though it were a companion on the road. When it whispered, "You cannot continue," he answered, "I hear you, but I will take one more step." When it said, "You will fail," he replied, "Perhaps, but I will walk forward anyway." When it shouted, "You are alone," he said, "Then let loneliness walk beside me, but I will not stop." That was the beginning of a new way. Fear was no longer the master walking ahead of him. It was the shadow walking behind. The road stretched on, carrying him higher into hills where the air thinned and the nights grew colder. His body weakened, but his spirit strengthened, and far ahead, at last, he saw it, the mountain of silence rising against the horizon, unmoving, unbending, ancient. And he knew his true trial was yet to come. The mountain of silence did not draw closer quickly. For many days it remained only a shape against the horizon, a shadow laid upon the sky. Each step forward seemed to lengthen the road instead of shorten it. That is the way with great trials. The nearer you walk, the farther they appear, because you begin to measure not with your feet, but with your fear. The young man learned this truth as the days lengthened into weeks. The land changed as he moved. The meadows gave way to rock, the rivers narrowed and ran faster, and the trees grew thin. Nights grew colder. Fires took longer to light, and when he managed one, the smoke clung stubbornly to his clothes. Fear found a new home in these discomforts. At first, fear came in the voice of hunger. His bread grew hard, his bag lighter, his ribs pressed against his skin, his muscles thinned. Fear whispered, "You will starve before you arrive. You will collapse on the road, and no one will find your bones." But hunger, unlike fear, is honest. It tells you when it arrives, it tells you how sharp it is, and it does not exaggerate. So he listened not to fear, but to his stomach. He measured his steps, he conserved his strength, he chewed slowly. He discovered that hunger can be carried if you walk gently. Fear had promised collapse, but collapse never came. Then fear changed its tone. It became weather. One afternoon, clouds gathered with sudden fury, and the wind turned wild. Rain lashed his face, soaking his cloak, chilling him to the bone. He searched for shelter and found only a hollow beneath a leaning stone. He huddled there through the night, teeth chattering, shivering so hard his body ached. Fear whispered, "This is your end. The storm will take you, the cold will still you, and dawn will never see your eyes open again." But dawn did come. He crawled out stiff, weak, but alive. The storm had passed. The mountain still waited, unchanged, unmoved. He learned fear always promises permanence, but nothing in the world is permanent. Not storms, not pain, not even despair. He continued. The land grew harsher. Rocks cut his feet through worn sandals. His skin blistered, cracked. Water became scarce. The few streams he found ran thin and bitter. He learned to drink slowly, to let each drop linger on his tongue before swallowing. Fear whispered, "There will be no more water. You will dry like the earth. You will die of thirst with the mountains still far away." But the next day brought rain. He held his cloak open, let it soak, then squeezed the water into his mouth. Fear had again lied. Thirst had been real, but death had not arrived. One evening he reached a barren ridge. The path grew narrow, dropping steeply on either side. The wind pressed against him, testing his balance. Below, jagged rocks waited like teeth. Fear shouted, "One slip and it is finished. One gust and you are gone. Why risk another step?" He stopped. His legs trembled. His breath caught. For a long moment he stood frozen, staring at the path before him. Then he whispered aloud, "If I must fall, let me fall walking forward." And with that, he placed his foot ahead. Step by step, heart pounding, he crossed. When he reached the other side, his body collapsed, but his spirit grew tall, for he understood. Fear thrives in the middle of the path. It tells you the first step will kill you. It tells you the middle is too far to return. It tells you the last step is unreachable. But if you keep stepping, the path eventually ends. That night, he dreamed again. In his dream, he saw the village. He saw the well, the square, the people laughing. But when he tried to walk toward them, they faded into mist. In their place rose the mountain, vast and dark, its peak hidden in clouds. He woke with his chest heavy, his heart racing. Fear whispered, "You will never return. You will be swallowed by this mountain, and no one will remember you. But he asked himself, if I am forgotten, what changes? The world will still turn. The rivers will still run. The fields will still grow. Memory is not the measure of a life. Presence is. And so he walked on. He began to notice how fear used loneliness against him. Each day without another voice, each night without another fire, fear grew louder. It told him he was abandoned, that he was foolish, that no man could walk this road alone. Loneliness is a sharp blade. It cuts slowly, silently, without blood. But he remembered the elders. He remembered their lines, their calm, their laughter, even in sorrow. He remembered how they carried loss without being broken. And he told himself, if they could endure with company, I can endure in solitude. Loneliness is not death. It is only silence. And silence can be a teacher. So he treated loneliness as he treated fear. He sat with it, watched it, named it. This ache in my chest is not danger. It is only the absence of voices. It cannot kill me unless I surrender to it. One evening, he climbed to a high ridge. The sun was setting, painting the sky with fire. Below him stretched valleys, rivers, forests. All the places he had walked, he saw how far he had come, how much he had endured. Fear whispered, look how alone you are, how small, how fragile. All this land could swallow you and no one would know. But he answered, yes, I am small. Yes, I am fragile, but I am still here. I am walking, and that is enough. The mountain now loomed closer. Its base was visible, its slope steep, its peak lost in mist. Each step forward carried him nearer to the place of trial. And with each step, fear grew louder, as though it knew its throne was threatened. It tried every mask it knew: hunger, thirst, storm, loneliness, comparison, despair. But the young man had grown. He was not fearless, but he was steady. He did not silence fear, but he no longer bowed to it. He treated it as a companion, loud, nagging, troublesome, but powerless to lead unless given permission. And so, as he neared the mountain of silence, he whispered again the words that had carried him across the bridge, across the ridge, through storm and hunger. If I must fall, let me fall walking forward. For he knew now that fear cannot stop a man who chooses forward. The day came when the young man stood at the foot of the mountain of silence. It rose before him like a wall built by eternity itself. The slopes were steep, the stones jagged, the air thin. Clouds wrapped the peak like a veil, and the wind that rushed down from its heights carried no warmth. He stood for a long time, his feet planted in the dust, his eyes fixed upward. Fear whispered, this is too much. You have come far enough. Turn back. Return to the valley, to the village, to the safety of the known. But another voice spoke, quieter, deeper. It said, you did not come this far to stop where the road begins. And so he began to climb. The first hours were steady. His legs were strong from the journey, his breath practiced by many days of walking. But the mountain is patient, and it does not reveal its trials too quickly. It waits until your body tires, until your spirit weakens, and then it presses. By the second day, the climb grew harder. The paths narrowed, crumbling under his feet. The wind clawed at him, pulling his cloak like greedy hands. The cold bit deeper, making his fingers numb, his breath sharp. Each step demanded thought, and each thought invited fear. What if I slip? What if I cannot find shelter? What if the mountain is endless? He fought not with beasts, not with men, but with these voices. Fear has no body, but it presses heavier than stone when you are weary. At night he found a hollow beneath a ledge. He gathered what little wood he had, lit a small fire, and huddled close. The flames flickered weakly against the wind, casting long shadows on the rock, and in those shadows fear came alive. He saw shapes moving, though nothing moved. He heard whispers, though no one spoke. He felt eyes upon him, though he was alone. His heart raced, his body tensed, his hand gripped the knife, though no enemy appeared. For hours he sat, trembling, until at last exhaustion carried him into sleep. And in sleep dreams came, dreams of fallen endlessly, dreams of voices calling his name from the darkness, dreams of faces twisted in despair. He woke with a cry, drenched in sweat despite the cold. Fear whispered, "Even in your sleep I will follow you. You cannot escape me." But he answered softly, "Then follow, but I will keep climbing." The next days blurred together. Hunger gnawed at him. His bread was gone, his water scarce. He ate roots, chewed bitter leaves, licked dew from stones. His body weakened, but his will remained. Fear tried again. "You will die here. No one will know your name. No one will find your bones. All this effort will be nothing." But he had learned from the elders, from his father's illness, from the caravan's return. He knew that fear exaggerates endings before they arrive. He whispered back, "Perhaps, but if I die, I will die walking forward." That is not nothing. One afternoon, the climb brought him to a narrow ridge. To one side, the mountain fell away into mist. To the other, cliffs rose high, sheer and cold. The path was no wider than his body, and the wind rushed like a river. He froze, staring at the drop. Fear screamed now, louder than ever. "Turn back. One slip, one gust, and you are gone. The mountain will claim you. This is madness." His legs trembled, his chest tightened. He closed his eyes, breathed, remembered the bridge, the well, the ridge from before. He whispered the words that had carried him through each trial. "If I must fall, let me fall walking forward." And he stepped. Each step was a battle. His arms clung to the rock, his feet searched for purchase. The wind tore at him, trying to drag him into the abyss. Fear roared, "You will not make it. This is your end." But step by step, breath by breath, he moved. When at last he reached the wider ground, his body collapsed, but his spirit was steady. He did not shout in victory. He only whispered, "I am still here." Night came again, and with it, silence. He found no wood for fire. The cold wrapped him like iron. He curled against the stone, shivering, and in the silence, fear returned, not as roar, not as scream, but as echo. It showed him images sharper than any blade. He saw his village empty, the well dry, his mother's voice calling, but unheard. He saw himself falling, broken, forgotten. He saw not beasts or storms, but loneliness, stretched forever. He wept. His body shook, not from cold alone, but from the weight of these visions. And in that moment, he almost turned back. He almost surrendered. But then he remembered. He remembered the boy who once feared the well. He remembered the young man who once trembled at speaking. He remembered the lessons. Fear exaggerates. Fear lies. Fear demands payment early. So he sat in the silence, tears freezing on his cheeks, and he said aloud, "I see you, fear. You may walk with me, but you will not lead me." And something shifted. The visions did not vanish. but they weakened. They became less sharp, less heavy. For the first time, he felt not crushed by fear, but taller than it, not because it was gone, but because he had named it. He slept then, not peacefully, but steadily. The next morning, he rose with weak limbs but strong spirit. He continued the climb. Higher and higher he went. The air grew thin, each breath a struggle. His head pounded, his chest burned, but still, step by step, he moved. The mountain tested him not with beasts, but with silence, with hunger, with wind, with visions. And always fear tried to twist these trials into endings. You cannot breathe. You cannot eat. You cannot endure. Stop. Turn back. Quit. But he remembered what he had learned. Fear is loudest before action. So each time he stepped, each time he breathed, each time he continued. At last, he reached a plateau near the peak. The ground was flat, the wind calmer. He collapsed there, too weak to climb further. The sky above was gray, the clouds thick. Silence pressed down on him, heavy, total. And in that silence, fear came one final time. Not as storm, not as hunger, not as loneliness, but as voice. It spoke in his own voice, his own tone. It said, "You have wasted your life. You will die here. All your effort means nothing. You could have stayed safe. You could have lived with peace. But now you will vanish into stone and wind, forgotten, meaningless." He listened. His heart pounded. His breath burned. He closed his eyes. And then, slowly, he spoke. Perhaps I will die here. Perhaps I will be forgotten. But fear, hear me now. You do not decide. You may walk with me. You may whisper. You may follow. But you will never again lead. For I choose forward even unto death. And that is enough. The silence did not answer. The mountain did not move. The clouds did not part. But within him, something shifted. Fear remained, but it was smaller. It was no longer a god. It was no longer a master. It was only a shadow. And shadows cannot move without light. He was the light. And with that, he lay back upon the stone, not in defeat, but in rest. For he knew the true trial was not the mountain, but himself. And he had met it. Night fell on the plateau like a slow curtain. There was no fire, no warmth, only the rock beneath and the wind above. The young man drew his cloak tight, but the cold entered him anyway, moving bone by bone, thought by thought. He curled against the mountain, but mountains do not embrace. They simply endure. At first, the silence seemed like a gift. After the storm, after the wind, after the pounding of his own heart, the stillness was welcome. But silence, if you sit with it long enough, begins to reveal what noise had been hiding. And so it was here. He closed his eyes, but visions rose behind them. He saw his village, lamps glowing, fires burning, people laughing. But when he tried to walk toward them, they turned away. Their laughter grew sharper, their backs colder. Fear whispered, "They do not miss you. They do not even remember you. Your absence has left no mark." He opened his eyes, gasping. The village was gone, only stone remained. But the whisper did not leave. It pressed again. "You are small. You are nothing. You will vanish like dust, and the world will move on as if you never lived." He wanted to argue, but he had no strength. The thought settled heavy, heavier than the mountain itself. For what if it was true? What if he was nothing? Hours passed. The stars appeared, sharp and cold, piercing the sky. He stared at them, feeling smaller with each one. Fear grew bold in that starlight. "Look at them," it said. countless, eternal. And you? A brief flicker, gone in an instant. What is your climbing, your striving, your suffering compared to this vastness? His chest tightened. His eyes burned. The weight of insignificance crushed him. He curled tighter, whispering, I am small, I am small, I am small. And yet a softer thought rose. Not loud, not certain, but gentle. Yes, I am small. But small does not mean nothing. The flame of a lamp is small, yet it can guide a traveler. A seed is small, yet it can grow a forest. Small is not meaningless. Small is the beginning of meaning. He let that thought linger, fragile as it was. Fear pushed back. Your flame will go out. Your seed will never sprout. You are wasting your life. But he answered, weakly but steadily, then let me burn while I can. Let me be a seed even if I am never a tree. Let me live while I breathe. That is enough. The visions shifted. He saw himself failing, slipping on the rocks, falling into the abyss, his body broken. He saw his journey ending not in triumph, but in waste. Fear whispered, this is how it ends? Your courage will not save you. You will die as you lived, afraid, forgotten. He trembled. His breath came ragged. But then he remembered the bridge, the ridge, the cave, the nights by the well. Each time, fear had promised endings. Each time, the endings had not come. And even when loss had come, his father's illness, his sorrow in love, it had not been as fear described. So he said aloud into the silence, you have lied to me before, fear. I will not trust you now. The visions weakened like smoke thinned by wind. But the night was not finished. The deepest trial still waited. As the hours stretched, fear came dressed not as loss, not as failure, but as death itself. He felt it in his bones, in his slowing breath, in the stillness that wrapped tighter. Fear whispered, this is it. This is your last night. You will not see the sun. You will die here, cold, alone, meaningless. His body shook, not from cold now, but from dread. He imagined the stillness after breath, the endless dark, the nothingness that waits beyond. He wanted to run, but where could he go? There is no path away from death. For the first time, he felt truly trapped. He wept, not for the mountain, not for the village, but for himself, for the part of him that wanted more life, for the boy who had once laughed by the river, for the man who had hoped for love. And then, in the middle of his weeping, a strange calm came, not because fear left, but because he realized, if this is death, then so be it. If this is my end, then let it come while I am facing it, not running from it. He whispered, yes, I will die one day, perhaps tonight, perhaps years from now. But until that moment arrives, I am still alive, and while I live, I choose forward. Death gave no reply. Fear grew quiet. The stars still shone, the cold still bit. But something inside him loosened. He understood. The fear of death is not death. It is only another shadow, and shadows cannot harm you if you walk in the light of presence. The rest of the night passed slowly, each hour an eternity. He dozed, woke, shivered, dreamed, whispered. Fear rose again and again, but each time he answered the same. You may walk with me, but you will not lead me. At last, the sky grew pale. Dawn spread across the horizon, soft and steady. The mountain did not change. The wind did not still. But within him, something had shifted. He had faced insignificance and found meaning in smallness. He had faced failure and remembered fear's lies. He had faced death and discovered that its shadow is heavier than its substance. And so, as the sun rose, he stood, not tall, not strong, but steady. Fear remained, but it was smaller, quieter, less certain. He whispered to himself, to the mountain, to the sky, "I am still here." When the first rays of dawn touched the plateau, the young man stirred. His body was stiff, his lips cracked, his eyes heavy from a night of trials. But his spirit was steadier than it had ever been. He had not conquered the mountain, but he had survived the night. And survival after such a night is its own form of victory. He rose slowly, stretching weary limbs, and turned his face toward the peak. The mountain of silence loomed higher still, its crown hidden by shifting clouds. He knew the path ahead would demand more than his body wished to give. Yet he also knew that retreat was no longer possible. Not because the way back was blocked, but because the man who had started this climb no longer existed. The one who remained could only walk forward. He began again, step after step, each footfall heavy but certain. The air thinned, burning his lungs. His breath came ragged, every inhale a knife, every exhale a surrender. He paused often, leaning against the stone, listening to the pounding of his heart. And each time, fear whispered, "This is the limit. You cannot go further. The air itself will kill you." But he smiled faintly, for he had learned the language of fear. He answered, "Perhaps, but I will take one more step before I believe you." And so he climbed. By midday, the slope grew steeper. Loose stones slid beneath his feet, sending echoes tumbling into the abyss below. He moved carefully, each step a negotiation between caution and courage. The wind rose, fierce and cutting, tearing at his cloak, pressing him toward the edge. Fear shouted, "One gust will end you, one mistake will undo everything. Why risk another step?" He remembered the ridge from before, the bridge over the river, the narrow path where wind had once threatened him. He whispered, "If I must fall, let me fall walking forward." And he pressed on. As he climbed higher, clouds swallowed him. The world below vanished, leaving only gray mist and stone. He could see no horizon, no sky, no ground. Only a few feet ahead, then nothing. Fear grew louder in the blindness. You are lost. You are walking in circles. You will never reach the peak. You will die here in fog, forgotten, swallowed by emptiness. But he remembered the fog of his childhood when he had lost the path, yet found his way by listening. He paused, closed his eyes, and listened. The mountain was not silent. It spoke in small ways. The drip of water against stone, the whistle of wind through cracks, the crumble of gravel underfoot. These were not guides in the way fear demanded, but they were truths. And truth, however small, was always stronger than fear's lies. He placed one hand on the stone and followed its line upward. Slowly, carefully, steadily, he climbed through the fog. Hours passed, but the fog thinned at last, and sunlight returned. He emerged onto another ledge, higher than he had ever been. The valley stretched far below, rivers like silver threads, forests like patches of green cloth. He stood there long, gazing out. Fear whispered still, "Look how far you are from everything you love. Look how alone you are. No voice, no hand, no companion but me." And he answered, "Then be my companion, fear. Walk with me, but do not lead me, for I will walk forward, with or without you." He climbed further. The path narrowed again, winding like a serpent. His body weakened, each step slower, his vision blurred. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, exhaustion pressed, and in his weakness, fear returned with new weapons, not storm, not hunger, not loneliness, but memory. It showed him the well, the boy who trembled and turned away. It showed him the feast, where he spoke too softly and sat in shame. It showed him the hunt, where his spear missed and his courage failed. It whispered, "This is who you are, not brave, not strong. You have always failed. You will fail again." He staggered, knees buckling. The weight of memory nearly crushed him. But then he remembered another truth. Fear remembers only failures. It does not remember victories. He forced himself to recall the bridge he had crossed, the ridge he had endured, the truths he had spoken, the kindness he had dared. And he whispered aloud, "Yes, I have failed, but I have also endured. I have also spoken. I have also walked, and I am walking still." The memories faded. Fear had lost its hold. By evening, he reached a high plateau just below the peak. There, the mountain gave him no more path. Only a sheer wall of stone remained, impossible to climb. He collapsed against it, too weary to continue, too weak to descend. Fear whispered, "This is the end. You have come this far only to fail at the last step. The mountain will keep its secret. You will die here, one step short of the summit." Tears filled his eyes. His chest ached. For a moment, despair crushed him harder than any stone. But then he leaned back, looking up at the wall. The clouds above shifted, and in the brief clearing, he saw the peak, not far, not unreachable, but waiting. He laughed, though his throat was dry. "So close," he whispered, "so close." And in that laughter, something broke. Not the wall, not the mountain, but fear itself. For fear cannot endure laughter. It thrives in solemnity, in despair, in silence, but it shrinks when met with joy. He lay there through the night, cold, hungry, trembling, yet strangely at peace. Fear came again, whispering of death, of insignificance, of failure, but he only smiled faintly, answering, "Then let it be so, for I have walked forward, and that is enough." When dawn came again, he rose slowly, leaned against the stone, and whispered, "I am still here." The peak remained above him, hidden still, but he no longer needed to stand upon it to know its lesson. The mountain had not spoken, but in its silence it had taught. Fear is not slain. It is not banished. It is not defeated once for all. It is understood, named, befriended, and placed where it belongs, not on the throne, but in the shadow. And so he began his descent. He was not the same man who had begun the climb. His body was weaker, his strength spent, but his spirit was steadier, calmer, deeper. Fear walked with him still, but it no longer led, and that, he understood, was the true victory. The young man descended only part way from the plateau before stopping. His body begged for rest. His stomach ached for food. His throat burned for water. And yet, something within told him that the descent was not the end. The mountain of silence had not finished with him. It had only peeled away the first layers. The true trial still waited, higher, deeper, unseen. He turned again toward the heights. The peak remained veiled, clouds swirling like guardians that refused him passage. He felt small, frail, foolish, but he also felt summoned. And when the mountain summons, a man either answers or spends his life wondering what might have been. He gathered himself, steadying with slow breaths. Each inhale was thin and sharp, each exhale a surrender of strength. But his will remained, and so he climbed again, this time not seeking to conquer the mountain, but to meet what waited above. Hours blurred into days. He counted not by sun or stars, for clouds hid both, but by the rhythm of exhaustion. Climb until legs tremble, stop until breath steadies, climb again. Sleep came in broken fragments, hunger gnawed like a beast, thirst scraped his throat raw. Fear whispered constantly, though no longer with shouts. It murmured, steady as dripping water, "You cannot do this. You are wasting yourself. You will die here, and nothing will change." The constancy of the whisper wore him thin. Loud fear can be resisted. It rallies your defiance. But quiet fear, steady and persistent, erodes like water on stone. He found himself doubting, not in sudden waves, but in slow erosion. Perhaps I should return. Perhaps there is nothing more here. Perhaps the traveler's tale was only a story, and I am a fool chasing shadows. Yet each time despair thickened, he remembered a lesson from before. Fear is always too early. It proclaims endings before they arrive. And so, each time, he took one more step, not because he was certain, but because he refused to let fear decide. At last, he reached a place unlike any other, a vast ledge near the mountain's heart. The air was still. The stone was smooth, as if shaped by hands, and in its center stood a single great rock, upright, tall as a man, worn by wind and time. Around it, silence deeper than any he had known. He sat before the stone, exhausted. His body quivered, his lips cracked, his eyes hollow. And in that silence, the true trial began. At first, nothing happened. No storm, no vision, no voice. Only the sound of his own breath. Hours passed. His mind grew restless. Fear began to murmur, "There is nothing here. You have wasted your life. You have left your people, your home, for emptiness." He fought the thought, but it returned, heavier each time. Emptiness is all you will find. You will die here, nameless, meaningless, a fool who mistook silence for wisdom. His chest tightened, his body curled, tears came unbidden. For a moment, he believed it. What if it was true? What if there was no secret, no lesson, only stone and silence? But then another thought rose, faint, fragile. Perhaps silence itself is the lesson. He clung to that. He breathed it. He whispered aloud, "If silence is all you give me, then silence is enough. If the only gift of this mountain is emptiness, then let me learn from emptiness. I will not flee it." As soon as he spoke, the silence deepened. The air grew heavy, pressing against him. He felt as though unseen eyes watched, as though the mountain itself leaned closer. And then visions came. First, he saw his failures, the well where he trembled as a boy, the feast where he spoke too softly, the hunt where his spear missed, the love he never confessed. Each moment played before him, sharper than memory, each one accusing him. "You were afraid. You faltered. You failed." He wept. He whispered, "Yes, I was afraid. Yes, I failed. Yes, I faltered. But I am still here and still walking." The visions shifted. He saw losses, his father's illness, the caravan that was late, the friend who nearly walked into ruin. Each moment replayed, not as it was, but darker, heavier, twisted by fear. You could not save them. You are powerless. You are nothing. He bowed his head. His chest ached, but he whispered, "I am powerless over many things. That is true. But powerless does not mean meaningless. I can still walk. I can still speak. I can still love." The visions darkened further. He saw death, his own body broken, his village empty. the world moving on without him. Fear spoke, "This is the truth. You will vanish. You will be forgotten. All your striving is ash." He shook, sobbed, nearly surrendered, but then he remembered, fear shows only endings. It never shows the middle. It never shows the journey. And he whispered, "Yes, I will die. Yes, I will be forgotten." But life is not measured by memory. It is measured by presence. And in this moment, I am alive. The visions faded. The silence returned, deeper still. He sat shivering, exhausted, emptied. Yet within the emptiness, a strange calm grew. He realized the mountain had shown him nothing new, only what fear had always whispered. But here, in the stillness, he had faced it directly, without distraction, without escape. That was the beginning of the great trial. The silence after the visions was not relief. It was heavier than before, as if the mountain had only begun to unroll its scroll. The young man sat before the tall stone, trembling, wondering if perhaps he had endured all there was to endure. But the mountain does not spend itself in one breath. He closed his eyes, seeking rest, but the silence stirred again, shifting into new shapes. At first, it came not as fear, but as comfort. He saw himself back in the village. The well no longer frightened him. The square was full of laughter, and his voice carried clearly among his people. He saw himself strong, respected, admired. He saw love returned, work rewarded, life made whole. For a moment, warmth filled his chest. Tears came to his eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from longing. How sweet it felt to imagine such a life. But then he noticed the images were too perfect. No flaws, no shadows, no struggle. And he understood this was temptation. Fear was clever. It no longer tried to break him with despair, but to lure him with false hope. It whispered, "Why suffer here on stone when you could return to such a life? Why endure silence when laughter waits? Turn back. You have proved enough. You can still choose ease." He bowed his head, torn. For who does not long for comfort? Who does not wish for love, for peace, for the warmth of community? But then he remembered, fear has many voices. Sometimes it shouts, sometimes it murmurs, and sometimes it disguises itself as sweetness. He whispered aloud, "Even if such comfort is real, I did not climb here to return. I came to face what lies beyond fear, not to escape it. If ease is the price of truth, I will choose truth." The vision shimmered, flickered, then dissolved. The village faded, the laughter thinned, the warmth vanished. Only stone and silence remained. And then came another trial. This time, the silence showed him himself, not the boy he had been, not the man he was, but something in between. He saw himself standing tall, fearless, powerful, eyes blazing, voice commanding. He saw people bow to him, saw enemies flee, saw himself crowned not with gold, but with courage itself. Fear whispered, "This is who you could become. Take the mountain's power, and you will rule your life. You will never tremble again. You will never doubt again. You will never be weak." For a moment, his heart surged. Who would not wish to be free forever from trembling? Who would not wish to walk the earth without fear? He reached out, almost believing, but then he paused. Something in the image unsettled him. The figure was strong, yes, but also hard. The eyes blazed, but they did not soften. The voice commanded, but it did not comfort. And he understood. Fear was tempting him with another lie, the lie of invincibility. He whispered, "True courage is not the absence of fear. True courage is the presence of fear and the choice to walk anyway. If I lost all trembling, I would lose compassion. If I lost all weakness, I would lose the bond to others. Fear does not vanish. It is a shadow that teaches me where the light is. To be fearless would not make me human, but stone. The vision darkened, cracked, and vanished. The silence deepened again. The mountain pressed harder, testing him now with weariness. Time stretched. He could not tell day from night, hour from hour. He sat until his body cramped, lay until his bones ached, rose until his legs buckled. Hunger tore at him, thirst burned, exhaustion pulled at his eyelids. And in that exhaustion, fear returned with its simplest, cruelest whisper, "Give up. Nothing waits for you. No lesson, no truth, only suffering. End it now. Walk off the ledge. Let the fall take you. Let the silence swallow you. You have done enough. Quit." His heart raced. He looked toward the edge, the drop that yawned into mist. How easy it would be to let go, to stop climbing, stop fighting, stop breathing, to surrender. But then he remembered his father, lying weak, but still telling stories. He remembered the elders, faces lined with loss, but still carrying laughter. He remembered himself at the bridge, whispering, "If I must fall, let me fall walking forward." And he whispered now, "I will not fall by choosing to end. If I must fall, let it be while still moving. If silence wants me, it must take me while I live, not while I surrender." The urge weakened, though it did not vanish. He curled on the stone, shivering, whispering again and again, "Forward, forward, forward." When sleep came, it brought no rest. Dreams rose, dreams of endless paths, of mountains without peaks, of walking forever without arriving. In the dream he screamed, "When does it end? When will I arrive?" And the dream answered with silence. He woke, gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Fear whispered, "There is no arrival. You will walk forever, and forever will break you." He sat trembling, but then remembered a lesson from the ridge. Every path ends if you keep walking. Even the longest road eventually turns. So he answered, "Perhaps I will never arrive. But even then the walking is not wasted. Each step is itself arrival. Each breath is itself victory." The dream lost its grip. The whisper faded. At last he sat again before the tall stone, emptied, his body broken, his spirit raw. He had faced despair, temptation, false hope, false strength, the lure of surrender. And in each trial he had chosen, not always boldly, not always strongly, but steadily. He realized then that the great trial was not about defeating fear once and for all. It was about learning to recognize it in all its disguises, to name it, to sit with it, to answer it without fleeing. And as this realization settled, the silence shifted. It no longer pressed against him. It no longer weighed him down. It simply was. And in that stillness, he felt for the first time not crushed, but carried. He whispered into the silence, "I see you, fear. I hear you. You are part of me. You may walk with me, but you will not lead me. Never again." The silence gave no reply, but deep within, something changed. Fear remained, but it no longer held the throne. This was the heart of the great trial. The young man sat before the tall stone, emptied. His body quivered with fatigue, his throat burned with thirst, his stomach ached with hunger. His spirit was stretched thin, pulled between despair and endurance. Yet still he remained. He had not turned back. He had not fled. But the mountain was not finished. At first, the silence seemed almost merciful. After visions of failure, of false hope, of temptation, the stillness felt like rest. But silence is patient, and patience can be more cruel than storm. Hours passed. The sky above shifted from gray to black. The stars returned, sharp and cold. The young man lay on the stone, gazing upward, and slowly fear took a new form. It did not come as voices, nor as visions. It came as a question so vast it could not be answered, only endured. What is the meaning of all this? The words echoed not in his ears, but in his chest. What is the meaning of climbing, of suffering, of trembling? What is the meaning of life itself, if all ends in dust? His chest tightened. His breath grew shallow. For this was not the fear of death alone, nor of failure, nor of loneliness. This was the fear of meaninglessness. He whispered aloud, as if to steady himself, "There must be meaning, there must be purpose, there must be reason." But the silence gave no answer. The stars did not speak. The stone did not move. The mountain did not whisper truth. Again the question pressed, "What is the meaning?" He wept. His tears fell onto the stone, cold and salt. He thought of his village, of the well, of the feast, of his father, of the girl by the river. He thought of the bridge, the ridge, the hunt, the caravan, the market. He thought of every trial, every lesson, every step. And still the question swallowed him. What is the meaning? Why walk at all? He felt himself unravel. His strength was gone, his certainty broken. Fear whispered, "There is no meaning. All is void. All is dust. You climb for nothing. You live for nothing. You die for nothing." The weight of the void crushed him. He curled on the stone, sobbing, trembling, whispering, "Nothing, nothing, nothing." Time blurred. He did not know if minutes passed or hours. His body ached. His spirit nearly surrendered. The void stretched endless, a darkness deeper than death, a silence heavier than any storm. But then, faint, fragile, a memory stirred. He remembered the river of his childhood, the reeds standing steady, the fish writing sentences in water. He remembered how quiet had sometimes brought peace, how silence had sometimes revealed beauty. And he thought, if there is no meaning, then perhaps meaning is not given. Perhaps meaning is made. The thought was small, like a spark in the dark. Fear rushed to smother it. Number, you cannot make meaning. You are too small, too fragile, too weak. Meaning belongs to gods, not to men. But the young man whispered, "Small does not mean powerless. A seed is small, yet it grows. A flame is small, yet it warms. A word is small, yet it changes hearts." Fear pressed harder. Your seed will die. Your flame will burn out. Your word will be forgotten. He answered, "Then let it die after it has lived. Let it burn before it fades. Let it be spoken before it is forgotten. The void cannot take what has already been given." Something shifted within him. The void remained vast and endless, but he no longer feared its emptiness, for he realized emptiness is not nothing. It is space, space in which to plant, to burn, to speak, to live. He sat up slowly, trembling, but steady. He gazed at the stars, still countless, still cold, but instead of crushing him, their vastness now steadied him. For he thought, yes, I am small, but even the stars are small to the universe, and yet they shine. He whispered, I too will shine. not because I am eternal, but because I am alive. The void whispered back, but your light will fade. And he answered, then let it fade, having shone. That is enough. The silence deepened, no longer heavy, but vast. It did not crush him now. It carried him, for he understood the fear of meaninglessness is itself a lie. Meaning is not something given from outside. Meaning is made in the act of walking, in the choice to love, in the courage to face fear. Meaning is born in each step, each breath, each truth spoken. He lay back against the stone, eyes on the stars, and whispered, this is the meaning, to live while I live, to walk while I walk, to shine while I burn. That is enough. The silence gave no answer, but it no longer needed to. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in rest. The great trial had not ended, more would come, but he had faced the void, the deepest shadow of fear, and found not despair, but meaning, and that was a victory greater than any peak. The silence did not leave him after his confrontation with the void. It stayed, but its weight had shifted. No longer a burden pressing against him, it became a vast space in which his thoughts could rise and fall. He had not conquered it, but he had learned to breathe within it. That was enough to let him rest for a time. But the mountain of silence had not exhausted its lessons. And fear, though weakened, had not given up its throne so easily. It waits in every man, clever, patient, endlessly inventive. If despair and meaninglessness could not break him, then fear would try subtler weapons. The first was pride. As dawn lit the stones, he rose unsteadily to his feet. His body was thin, his steps weak, but his spirit felt strangely tall. He had endured nights of visions, hours of despair, the weight of the void itself. And a thought entered him. I have done what no one else has done. I have faced fear and triumphed. I am stronger than others. I am greater than those who never climb. The thought warmed him. It gave his weak body a false strength, lifted his weary chest, filled him with a strange satisfaction. He saw himself returning to the village, telling the story of his climb. He saw the people gather around, eyes wide, voices praising. He saw himself not as the trembling boy, but as the conqueror of fear, the master of silence. The warmth grew into fire. His hands trembled not from cold now, but from excitement. Yes, pride whispered, this is who you are, above others, beyond others, the chosen, the strong, the fearless. But then another whisper, quieter but truer. Fear has only changed its mask. This is not courage speaking. This is pride. And pride is only fear wearing a crown. He staggered at the thought. Pride is fear. How could that be? But then he saw clearly, pride is the fear of being small, disguised as greatness. It is the fear of insignificance, wrapped in boasting. It is the fear of being forgotten, hidden beneath the craving to be remembered. And so he sat again, trembling, whispering, I am not greater than others. I am not less. I am only a man walking forward, trembling but walking. That is all. The fire of pride faded. His chest softened. His spirit steadied. But fear was not done. If pride could not hold him, then doubt would try. As the day stretched long, silence pressed again, but not with emptiness now, with questions. What if your lessons are illusions? What if all you believe is false comfort? What if courage is nothing but another lie you tell yourself to endure suffering? What if everything you have spoken, every truth you have whispered, is nothing but weakness disguised? The questions pierced him like arrows. Doubt is not loud but sharp. It does not break quickly, it bleeds slowly. He felt the strength drained from him, not from hunger now, but from uncertainty. He whispered back, I have spoken truths. I have endured. I have walked forward. But doubt replied, and what if forward is the wrong way? What if you are only wandering deeper into illusion? What if fear has tricked you into believing you have power, when in truth you are lost? He collapsed to his knees, shaking. For how can one fight doubt? It does not roar, it questions. It does not command, it suggests. And in suggestion, it unravels certainty thread by thread. But then he remembered the elders again, how they laughed, even when life had torn from them what they loved. He remembered his father, who spoke stories even as his body weakened. He remembered that truth is not found in answers, but in presence. And so he whispered, perhaps I am wrong, perhaps I am lost, perhaps all this is illusion. But even so I choose to walk forward, for forward is not certainty, it is choice, and choice itself is meaning. Doubt pierced again, but weaker. It bled him still, but he endured. He lay upon the stone, eyes closed, breathing shallow. He had faced pride and seen it as fear. He had faced doubt and answered with choice, but fear had one last mask, one last illusion. That illusion was mastery. As he drifted between waking and sleep, he saw himself again, but not the boy trembling at the well, not the man faltering in love, not the climber trembling on ridges. He saw himself transformed, calm, radiant, unshaken. He saw himself above fear, untouchable, invulnerable. And fear whispered with its sweetest voice, this is what you have earned. This is the prize of your suffering, to rise above fear forever, to be unbreakable, eternal, unshaken. Take this crown, claim it, be free. His heart leapt. To be free of trembling forever, to never again bow to fear, to live as master untouchable. What greater gift could there be? He reached for it, almost believing. But then, faint as a breath, another memory stirred, the memory of the girl by the river, her laughter soft, her presence fragile, the memory of his father, weak but still human, the memory of the elders, lines on their faces carved by both sorrow and joy. And he understood. To be beyond fear is to be beyond love. For love carries risk, and risk carries fear. To be invulnerable is to be untouched, but to be untouched is to be alone. To claim mastery over fear is to claim mastery over the very thing that makes one human. He pulled back his hand. He whispered, no, I do not want to be unbreakable. I want to be breakable and still love. I want to be trembling and still walk. I want to be afraid and still choose forward. To master fear is to lose its lesson. I do not want mastery. I want companionship. Fear may walk with me, but not lead me. The vision cracked, faded, dissolved into the silence, and the silence changed. It was no longer heavy, no longer cruel. It simply was. A vastness, a space, a stillness, and within it he felt not small, not great, not master, not failure. He felt human. He lay back, eyes closed, tears on his cheeks, not of despair, but of clarity. He whispered, I am not fearless. I am not master. I am not above fear. I am only a man who chooses forward again and again. That is enough. The mountain gave no answer. But within him, something settled. The throne of fear was empty, not because fear was slain, but because he no longer offered it his crown. This was near the end of the great trial. The mountain was quiet after the illusions faded. Too quiet. The young man lay on the stone, wondering if, perhaps, this was the end, that the great trial had spent itself, that he had reached the core. Yet something in him knew. Silence is never the end. It is always the threshold. He closed his eyes. His body ached in every limb. Hunger clawed at his stomach. Thirst cracked his lips. Exhaustion pressed like iron. He felt hollow, emptied, almost transparent. It seemed that if the wind blew harder, it might carry him away like dust. And in that hollowness, fear returned, not as vision, not as question, but as presence. A quiet presence, sitting across from him like a companion by the fire. He did not tremble. He did not reach for his knife. He only breathed, watching the silence. And fear spoke, not in shouts, not in whispers, but in his own voice. I will never leave you. The words sank deep. He had wanted victory. He had wanted the mountain to strip fear from him, to set him free. But fear told him now, I am yours. I am stitched into your breath, woven into your heart, braided into your thoughts. You will never be without me. Tears filled his eyes, not of despair, but of recognition. He whispered, Then I will not fight you. I will not run from you. I will walk with you, but you will not lead me. Fear said nothing more. It sat with him, silent, steady, undeniable. The hours passed. Dawn came again, pale and cold. The young man rose slowly, unsteady on his feet. His body was weaker than it had ever been, but his spirit no longer shook. For he understood now that the trial was not to destroy fear, but to see it truly, to sit with it, to walk beside it. He turned toward the path downward. The peak still towered above, hidden in clouds. He would not stand upon it. He would not see the summit. But he no longer needed to. The mountain had already given him what he came for. He began his descent. Each step downward felt different from the climb upward. Before, the stones had pressed against him. The wind had pushed him back. The silence had mocked him. Now, though nothing in the mountain had changed, everything in him had. The stones were still sharp, the wind still cruel, the silence still vast. But he no longer mistook them for enemies. They simply were. On the second day of descent, he reached the ridge where he had once nearly fallen. The wind roared again, tearing at his cloak, tugging at his body. Fear rose, whispering, You may slip this time. You may die even now, after all you've endured. He smiled faintly. Perhaps. But if I slip, I will slip walking forward. And step by step he crossed. On the third day, he found the cave where dreams had once crushed him. He entered, lay upon the cold stone, closed his eyes. Visions came again, darkness pressing, walls closing, air thinning. But this time, he whispered, You may come, but you will not master me. I am here. I am breathing. I am alive. The visions weakened, dissolved, faded. He slept in peace. On the fifth day, he reached the bridge across the river. The planks groaned, the water roared. Fear shouted as before, You will fall, you will drown. He stepped calmly, whispering, If I fall forward, and the bridge carried him across. The mountain receded behind him. The land softened. The air thickened with warmth. Trees returned, rivers widened, birds sang. His body grew steadier with food and water, but his spirit remained quiet, deeper, slower. At last, after many days, the village came into view. Smoke rising from chimneys, children running in the square, the well waiting in its place. Nothing had changed, yet everything was different. The people greeted him not with fanfare, not with questions, but with quiet recognition. They saw the difference in his eyes, the stillness in his steps, the calm in his voice. They did not ask where he had gone, for they knew the answer was not in geography. They only welcomed him back as one welcomes the same man who has returned as another. That evening, he walked to the well. He placed his hands upon the stones, leaned forward, and looked in. The water reflected his face, thin, weary, lined with hardship. He gazed into the darkness below, the same darkness that had once paralyzed him as a boy. But now he saw only water, only shadow, only himself. Fear whispered faintly, "What if something waits below?" He smiled gently, "Then let it wait. I will not run." He stood long at the well, until the fear dissolved into quiet. Then he turned and walked home. The days that followed were simple. He worked, he spoke, he listened, he laughed. Fear visited him still. It came in small ways, when storms gathered, when silence pressed, when words trembled on his tongue. But he welcomed it now, not as master, not as curse, but as companion. When fear whispered, "You may fail," he answered, "Perhaps, but I will walk forward." When it whispered, "You may lose," he answered, "Yes, but I will love anyway." When it whispered, "You will die," he answered, "Yes, but I will live until then." And those who knew him noticed. They could not name it, but they felt calmer in his presence. Storms seemed smaller when he stood among them. Silence seemed gentler when he listened within it. Even fear seemed weaker when he spoke of it. He did not teach with grand speeches. He did not claim mastery. He did not boast of his climb. He only lived, steadily, calmly, with courage woven quietly into his days. And that was teaching enough, for the truth he had learned on the mountain of silence was simple, yet endless. Fear is not an enemy to slay. Fear is not a master to obey. Fear is a shadow, and shadows walk with light. Courage is not found in destroying the shadow, but in choosing the direction of your steps while it follows. And so, the boy who once trembled at the well, the young man who once faltered at words, the climber who once wept upon the stone, became the man who walked forward, not without fear, but with it beside him. This was the completion of the great trial. The mountain did not follow him home, but its silence did. When the young man returned to the village, his steps were slow, his body thin, his face lined by the climb. Yet in his eyes there was something that had not been there before. Not fire, not triumph, not glory. Something quieter, a steadiness, a depth, a stillness that carried even in his silence. The villagers welcomed him without questions. They did not ask what he had seen, for they knew that mountains do not give answers in words. They did not demand explanations, for they knew that explanations cannot carry the weight of silence. They only welcomed him, gave him bread, gave him water, gave him rest. And he returned not as conqueror, not as prophet, not as hero, but as one of them, working, eating, living. Yet everything he did was different now, though no one could say exactly how. He returned to the well that had once frightened him. He placed his hands on the stone, looked into the dark water, and smiled faintly. The children who once avoided it now played nearby, watching him. They saw no trembling in his shoulders, no hesitation in his eyes. And though he said nothing, their laughter grew freer, as though the well itself had lost its teeth. He returned to the square where once he had spoken too softly. When the elders asked for words at the harvest feast, he rose. His voice was not loud, but it carried. He did not speak long, only a few simple words of gratitude, but his tone was steady, and the silence after he spoke felt richer than the words themselves. The villagers nodded, not because the words were great, but because they came from a man who no longer hid from his trembling. He returned to the fields, where storms once made him imagine ruin. Now, when clouds gathered, he still felt the whisper of fear, but he no longer bowed to it. He worked steadily, reminding himself, fear is always too early. Crops may fail, but not yet. Let me work today, for today is enough. His calm spread to others. When storms came, they endured without panic. When storms passed, they laughed more easily, as though his steadiness had steadied them too. He returned to friendship. Once, fear had kept him silent when he saw a companion walking toward harm. Now he spoke gently, directly, without trembling, not with judgment, but with care. Some listened, some did not. But his words were no longer caged by fear, and those who listened found that his voice carried weight, not because it was forceful, but because it was honest. He returned to love. Once he had hidden his heart behind silence, trembling at rejection. Now he did not shout his affections, but neither did he hide them. He spoke them plainly, simply. I care for you. I wish to walk beside you. Sometimes the answer was no, sometimes yes, but he no longer feared either, for he had learned the greater loss is in never speaking. The villagers noticed these changes. They whispered of them quietly, though not always with understanding. Some said he was different, others said he was the same, but all felt calmer when he was near. His presence carried something of the mountain, not its cruelty, but its stillness. And the children especially gathered around him. They asked not of peaks or trials, but of simple things. Why does the river shine at night? Why do the reeds bend but not break? Why do we fear the dark? He answered not with riddles, but with patience, sometimes with stories, sometimes with silence, sometimes with laughter. And in his presence their fears seemed smaller, less sharp, more like shadows that could be named. Yet fear still visited him. It whispered when storms gathered, when sickness touched the village, when silence stretched too long. But he no longer mistook it for prophecy. He treated it as companion, saying, Yes, I hear you. Walk with me, but you do not lead. And in that steady companionship, life unfolded. One evening, as he sat by the river, a boy approached him. The boy's eyes were wide, his hands restless. He whispered, I cannot sleep. The dark fills me with voices. How do I stop being afraid? The young man looked at him gently and said, You do not stop. Fear will always come. The trick is not to silence it, but to sit with it. Breathe. Listen. Name what is real. Tell fear, You may walk with me, but you will not lead. Then take one step. That is enough. The boy frowned, thinking, then asked, Will it always be with me? The young man smiled faintly. Yes, but you will grow stronger in walking beside it. Fear is not your enemy. It is your shadow, and shadows walk only where light already shines. The boy nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but calmer. He sat with the young man listening to the river and found he could breathe more easily. This was how transformation spread, not by sermon, not by proclamation, but by presence. The man who had climbed the mountain of silence returned not with mastery, but with humility, not with victory, but with companionship, not with a crown, but with a shadow that no longer ruled him. And so his life became his teaching. The days unfolded as they always had, sun rising, work calling, seasons turning, yet within them everything was different for the young man. The mountain of silence had given him no crown, no new power, no invincibility. What it gave him was subtler, a way of walking, a way of breathing, a way of choosing. But life, like the mountain, does not release a man once he has been tested. It continues to place stones in his path to see if the lessons he carries are woven into him or only worn upon him. The first test came through grief. One winter, sickness spread through the village. The old and the weak suffered most. Among them was a woman who had once shown him kindness, a voice that had encouraged him when he faltered as a boy. He visited her home, sat at her side, listened to her breathing grow shallow. Fear whispered its old song. She will die. You will be helpless. You will grieve. You will be broken. Once, such a whisper would have devoured him before the loss arrived. He would have lived the grief in advance, carrying sorrow before sorrow was due. But now, he sat steady. He listened to her words, laughed gently when she laughed, held silence when she could not speak. He did not rush ahead to her death. He remained with her life. And when the day came that she did pass, he wept, not with the panic of fear, but with the tenderness of presence. He let grief do its work when grief arrived, not before. And when others around him despaired in anticipation, he reminded them, fear demands payment early, but life never asks for such a debt. Be present with her now. The loss will come in its own time. Do not live it twice. The villagers nodded, and though sorrow still came, it was not sharpened by fear's advance. The second test came through conflict. Two neighbors quarreled over land, each accusing the other of theft, each raising voices that cut through the square. The villagers gathered, murmuring, tension rising. Once, the young man would have avoided such a scene. Fear of speaking, fear of judgment, fear of being wrong would have kept him silent. But now, silence was no longer a prison. It was a choice. And when he chose to speak, it was not with trembling, but with calm. He stepped between them, not loudly, not with force, but steadily. He said, "Fear is speaking in both of you. Fear that you will lose what is yours. Fear that you will be less than the other. But the land will not vanish. The truth will not vanish. Only your peace will vanish if you let fear lead this quarrel." His words did not solve the dispute. The land still needed to be measured. The elders still needed to decide. But his presence slowed the anger. His calm drew the villagers back from the edge of fury. And later, when the decision was made fairly, both sides accepted it without rage. The third test came through leadership. During a season of drought, the people grew anxious. The river thinned, the crops weakened, the air carried the taste of dust. Fear spread among them. We will starve. We will die. The earth has abandoned us. Murmurs grew. Panic stirred. The villagers turned to the young man not because he was chief, not because he held authority, but because his presence carried steadiness. They asked, "What do we do? How do we endure?" He thought of the mountain, of the long climb, of the times when hunger had gnawed at him, when thirst had cracked his lips, when fear had told him he would die. He remembered how each time he had survived by walking, by breathing, by choosing one step more. So he told them, "We cannot control the clouds. We cannot summon the river, but we can share what we have. We can endure today, then endure tomorrow. Fear will tell us that death is certain, but fear is always too early. Let us work together, one day at a time." And though drought still pressed them, the panic lessened. The villagers endured not with ease, but with steadiness. And when rains returned, they did not forget the calm he had given them. The fourth test came through himself. One evening, as he walked alone by the river, he felt the whisper of pride again. It rose quietly. "You have become a leader. The people look to you. You are more than others. You are above them." For a moment, his chest swelled. The voice was sweet, seductive. But then he remembered the mountain, remembered the illusion of mastery. And he whispered aloud, "I am not above them. I am not below them. I am only a man walking, trembling, but walking." The pride dissolved. His steps grew lighter. The fifth test came through love once more. A woman in the village looked toward him with affection. Fear rose, whispering as it had long ago, "What if she rejects you? What if you lose her? What if love brings sorrow?" But this time he did not bow. He spoke simply, gently. "I care for you. I wish to walk beside you if you will walk beside me." Her answer was uncertain, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, sometimes unsure. But he did not tremble, for he knew now the measure of love is not in its outcome, but in its honesty. Fear no longer silenced him, and whether she remained or not, he would not regret the words spoken. Through grief, through conflict, through leadership, through pride, through love, each time fear returned. Each time he welcomed it as companion, saying, "Walk with me, but do not lead me." The villagers began to understand without being told. They noticed that he did not live without fear. He lived with it. And in that living, they too learned to meet their fears, not by denial, not by surrender, but by walking steadily forward. And so, the mountain of silence lived in the village, not as a peak of stone, but as a way of living, carried in the heart of one man, and through him, shared quietly with many. A man cannot climb a mountain and remain unchanged, even if he speaks nothing of it. The climb lives in his eyes, in his breath, in the rhythm of his steps. And though the young man never stood before the villagers with proclamations, though he never declared himself master of anything, his presence carried a weight that others began to feel. The children noticed it first. They were often the most honest mirrors, for they had not yet learned to pretend. Where once they avoided the well at night, now they lingered there when he did. They watched him lean over its stones without flinching, saw him drop the bucket and wait calmly as the rope creaked in the dark. One boy asked him softly, "Are you not afraid of what waits below?" He smiled gently. "I am afraid, but fear does not forbid me. Fear walks beside me, but it does not pull the rope." The boy frowned, thinking, then laughed nervously. And yet the next day, that same boy went alone to the well and looked in longer than before. Not fearless, but braver. The young man did not call this teaching. He called it living. But the children learned anyway. Soon the elders, too, noticed. They asked for his counsel not because he was the wisest, but because his answers carried stillness. When disputes arose, he listened longer than others. When voices grew loud, his did not. When silence grew heavy, he did not rush to fill it. And so, when he spoke, his words carried weight. An elder once said to him after such a gathering, "Your words are not louder, but they are heavier. Where did you find this heaviness?" The young man bowed his head. "On the mountain, in silence, in fear, in myself." The elder nodded slowly. Then it was a good climb. But it was not only the elders who felt it. The people in daily life saw it too. When storms gathered, he did not rush with panic, but secured what could be secured and waited. When sickness spread, he did not despair, but tended to the sick with calm presence. When hunger threatened, he ate last, sharing what he could. Fear still visited him in these moments. It whispered, "This may be the end. This may be the ruin. This may be death." But he treated it as he had learned. "Walk with me, but do not lead me." And the people, seeing him steady in fear's presence, found themselves steadier too. There was a girl who came to him one day, tears on her cheeks. She said, "I cannot speak in front of others. My voice trembles. My heart races. I hide behind silence. How do I stop?" He smiled faintly, for he remembered himself in her. He said, "You do not stop. The trembling will come. The fear will rise. But speak anyway. Speak while trembling. Speak while afraid. That is the way forward." She frowned. "But what if I fail?" "Then fail while speaking," he said. "It is better to fail speaking than to succeed in silence. Fear steals your words before the world does. Do not let it." She nodded, uncertain, but months later, he saw her rise at a gathering, voice soft but steady. She trembled, yes, but she spoke. And when she sat down, her eyes found his, and he nodded once. She smiled faintly. There was a farmer who came to him during a drought, despair heavy in his face. He said, "The fields are dying. Fear says my children will starve. What do I do?" The young man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Feed them with what you have today. Tomorrow's hunger is not here yet. Fear is always too early. One day at a time, and we endure together." The farmer wept, but steadied. He returned to his work, not with hope of abundance, but with presence for the day. And the family endured. There was an elder widow who came to him after a sleepless night. She said, "When silence fills my home, I hear voices that are not there. Fear says I am haunted. Fear says I am cursed." The young man sat with her in silence for a long time. At last he said, "Silence has many voices. Some are fear, some are memory. None can harm you unless you believe them. When they come, breathe. Name what is real. This chair, this table, this breath. Fear will fade in truth's presence." She nodded slowly, and though her nights remained lonely, she later said the voices carried less power. These were not miracles. They were not victories shouted from rooftops. They were the quiet ripples of presence. His climb had not removed fear from his life. It had taught him to live with it, and that living itself became a lesson to others. But the greatest ripple was in himself, for he discovered that transformation is not an event. It is not sealed by one climb, one vision, one trial. It is woven into daily choices. Each day he awoke and said to himself, "Fear will come today. When it does, I will welcome it as companion, but I will not give it my crown." Some days he was strong in this, other days weak. But even in weakness, he did not return to chains. For he had learned, courage is not perfection. It is persistence, not the absence of trembling, but the decision to walk while trembling. One evening, he stood again by the river, the same river where once he had walked with love unspoken, where once he had hidden his heart. He listened to the water, steady and endless. Fear whispered faintly, "What if you waste your days? What if your life amounts to nothing?" He smiled gently. "Then let it be nothing, but let me live it fully. Let me walk while I can, speak while I can, love while I can. Fear, you may follow, but I choose forward." The river answered with silence, but the silence was not heavy. It was wide, vast, steady, and in it he felt at peace. Change in a man is never his alone. It seeps quietly outward like water soaking into soil. It may not shout, it may not blaze, but in time it nourishes roots unseen. The young man's climb had not made him greater than his people, nor apart from them. It had made him with them in a new way, and the village slowly began to carry the echo of the mountain of silence within its life. The first ripples came during storms. Once, when black clouds gathered, the people panicked. They rushed to tie roofs, shouted warnings, feared the winds that had in years past torn down homes. Children cried, elders muttered omens, mothers gathered food in trembling hands. But now they watched the young man. He worked calmly, hands steady, eyes clear. He secured what could be secured, but without hurry. When the winds rose, he stood with the others, shoulders straight, speaking softly. "Yes, the storm may damage. Yes, it may hurt us. But fear adds nothing to our strength. Let us endure the wind without giving it our hearts." The storm came, roared, passed. Some homes bent, some roofs tore, but the people noticed how much lighter the burden felt when they had not carried fear along with the storm. And from then on, whenever storms threatened, they found themselves calmer, steadier, not because the storm was smaller, but because their fear was. The second ripples came through sickness. Illness visited the village as it always does, claiming some, sparing others. Fear once ran rampant in such times, whispering of curses, of doom, of helplessness. But now the young man moved among the sick with quiet hands. He tended fevers, fetched water, spoke gently to the trembling. When fear whispered, "What if you too will sicken? What if you too will die?" he answered aloud in the hearing of others, "Perhaps. But I will still serve today. I will still love today. Death is certain, but not yet. And until it comes, life deserves presence." The villagers heard his words and found themselves steadier. They discovered that fear of sickness often weakened them more than the sickness itself. And slowly, the whispers of doom grew fainter, replaced by the rhythm of care. The third ripples came through loss. One season, a child wandered too near the river and was swept away. Grief tore through the village like fire. The parents wailed, neighbors wept, even the strong men bent beneath sorrow. Fear tried to add its own flames. Your children are not safe. None of you are safe. Every joy will end in ruin. Despair now before despair claims you later. But the young man stood with the grieving, silent at first, then speaking softly, "Yes, sorrow has come. Yes, life is fragile. But fear tells us to live sorrow before its time, to abandon joy before it leaves. Do not let fear rob you twice. Grieve fully when grief arrives, but let love live fully while it still remains. The parents clung to his words. Their sorrow did not vanish, but fear could not deepen it into despair. And others in the village, hearing, began to carry grief more gently, knowing that fear sharpens pain, but does not heal it. The fourth ripples came through daily work. At the market, when traders pressed with unfair bargains, the young man spoke steadily. This is worth more. You may accept or refuse, but I will not bow to fear of loss. Others, watching, learned to do the same. In the fields, when crops seemed weak, fear whispered, all will fail, you will starve. But he said aloud to his neighbors, fear always declares the harvest lost before the sun has set. Work today. Let tomorrow speak for itself. And his calm became theirs. In friendships, when silence threatened honesty, he spoke even while trembling. And soon others too dared to speak truths they once hid. The ripples spread quietly, unnoticed at first. But over seasons, the people began to realize they were living differently. They still feared the dark, the storms, the silence, the losses. Fear never left, but they no longer gave it the crown. They no longer let it lead every decision, every word, every breath. They began to live as he lived, walking forward with fear beside, but not ahead. One evening, the elders called him to speak. The square was full, torches lit, shadows dancing. The people waited. He stood slowly, quietly. He did not shout. He did not preach. He only spoke the words that had carried him up and down the mountain of silence. Fear will never leave us. It will always whisper, always press, always walk, but it does not need to lead. Walk forward anyway, speak truth anyway, love anyway, live anyway. This is courage, not to be without fear, but to walk with it as shadow, while you remain the light. The square fell silent. Then slowly, heads nodded, eyes softened, hearts steadied. From that night, the village was never the same, not because fear had vanished, but because they had learned how to live with it. And the young man, who once trembled at the well, who once faltered at words, who once wept upon the stone, became not a hero above them, but a companion among them, a living reminder that fear need not be throne nor master, only shadow. Seasons passed, the river swelled and shrank, the fields bore fruit and then lay fallow. Children grew taller, elders grew slower, and through it all the young man lived quietly among his people. He did not call himself teacher. He did not claim the mountain had made him more than any other. He worked as they worked. He ate as they ate. He grieved as they grieved. But the way he carried his life made all the difference. Fear still visited him as it visits every man and woman. It came in the dark hours of night when the mind wanders. It came when storms gathered, when sickness spread, when voices rose in anger, when silence pressed too long. But he no longer mistook fear for truth. He no longer gave it the throne. And so others began to walk as he walked. Ripples through generations. Children grew into youth, and those youths remembered him at the well, remembered his steady voice in the square, remembered his calm presence during storms. When they themselves trembled, they recalled his words. Fear may walk with me, but it will not lead me. And they repeated those words in their own trials. The elders found in him a steady companion. Once They had carried the village with shoulders heavy from both wisdom and worry. But now, when fear whispered of endings, "You are too old, too frail, too near the grave," they remembered how he had faced death on the mountain and returned with peace. And so they, too, met their last years not with panic, but with calm presence. Even the traders who came from distant places noticed the change. They expected the villagers to haggle nervously, to give in quickly, to tremble at the thought of loss. But they found steadier eyes, calmer voices, fairer bargains. They returned home, whispering of a village that carried itself with strange peace, as if some hidden current steadied them all, the quiet maturity of fear. The young man grew older. His hair darkened, then lightened with streaks of gray. His hands, once trembling with hesitation, now trembled with age. But the tremor of fear no longer ruled him. He laughed sometimes, saying, "I am still afraid of storms. I am still afraid of silence. I am still afraid of loss. But now I treat fear as an old neighbor, loud, persistent, but familiar. I nod to it, then go about my work." And the villagers laughed with him, for they knew this truth in their own lives. Fear had not left them, but it had lost its tyranny. A final lesson. One day, a boy came to him, a boy much like he once had been, eyes wide, voice trembling. "I want to climb the mountain," the boy said. The man, now older, looked at him long. He remembered his own trembling youth, the bridge, the ridge, the silence, the void. He remembered the weeping, the despair, the near surrender, and he smiled faintly. "You may climb," he said softly. "The mountain is there for all. But remember, the mountain gives nothing you do not already carry. It only strips away the noise so you can hear it. Fear will meet you there, but fear is not only on the mountain. Fear is here too, in the square, in the well, in the silence of night. You need not climb to meet it. You need only live." The boy frowned. "Then why did you climb?" The man laughed gently. "Because I needed to. My fear was loud in me, and the mountain gave me silence to hear it clearly. But you, perhaps you will learn it here. Perhaps you will carry courage without leaving. Every man's road is different, but fear waits on all roads." The boy nodded slowly, unsure, but he left with calmer steps. The last years. As the man aged, his strength waned. He no longer worked the fields as before. His voice grew softer, his pace slower. Yet his presence deepened. The people sought him not for his labor, but for his calm. When quarrels rose, he listened. When grief pressed, he wept with them. When joy came, he laughed without restraint. Fear still whispered in his last years, "The end is near. You will vanish. You will be forgotten." And he answered as he always had, "Yes, the end is near. Yes, I will vanish. Yes, I will be forgotten. But I live now. I walk now. I love now. That is enough." When at last his final day came, he lay in his home, surrounded by those who cared for him. The village was quiet, children peeking in, elders gathered close. His breath was shallow, his eyes half closed. Fear whispered one last time, "This is death. This is the dark. This is the end." He smiled faintly, whispering, "Then let it be so. Fear, you may walk with me even now, but you will not lead me. I go forward even here." And with that, his breath slowed, stilled, ceased, the legacy of presence. The village mourned him. They wept, They told stories. They remembered his steadiness. But more than memory, they carried his way of living. When storms rose in later years, they spoke his words. Fear adds nothing to our strength. When sickness spread, they reminded one another, death may come, but not yet. Let us live today. When quarrels flared, they said, fear is speaking. Let us listen more deeply. When silence pressed, they whispered, breathe. Name what is real. Fear will fade in truth's presence. And so his life rippled through generations. He was remembered not as the fearless man because he had never been fearless, but as the one who had learned to walk with fear as companion, not master. And so, children, the boy who once trembled at the well became the man who walked steadily through storms, through silence, through death itself. Not because he destroyed fear, but because he learned to live with it. This is the lesson of the mountain of silence. You will always be afraid. You will always tremble. Fear will never vanish, but you can choose. You can walk forward anyway. You can speak anyway. You can love anyway. And in that choice, fear loses its crown. Do not wait for a day without fear. It will never come. Do not wait to be fearless before you live. You will waste your life. Live now with fear beside you and let your light shine anyway. For courage is not a mountain peak. It is each step forward, trembling, but forward still.